Thank you very much, everyone who has been patient with us. We just had some technical difficulties, but I believe it is fixed now. So you are watching on DCCI YouTube channel as well as Raymond Ibrahim YouTube channel on the debate going to take place between Jay Smith and Raymond Ibrahim on the topic of did the Muhammad of Islam exist? I am hearing echo.
Sorry about that. That's my bad. I'm done.
That's okay. If you can mute your YouTube, let it run. Just if you mute it, that will be very helpful.
Okay.
Okay, so we already arranged the debate structure. I'll just give you update and then we take it from there. Please again, forgive us for the technical issues we faced. So topic is, did the Muhammad of Islam exist? 20 minutes of opening statement from both sides, and Raymond Ibrahim is going to go first. 2 rounds of 10 minutes of rebuttals, and then 8 minutes of closing statements from both sides. And after that, we will be taking questions from you. And as you put your questions forward, please make sure you tag DCCI ministries, as well as tell us who you are asking your question to. If you don't do that, your question is not going to go through. I'm just telling this nicely so that we don't have any problem. If everyone is ready, I can just start with intro of both of you, and then we take it from there. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay, so since Raymond Ibrahim is going to go first, I'll start with him and then we pass on to Jay Smith. Raymond Ibrahim, for over 20 years, Raymond Ibrahim has been at the fore of researching and publishing on Islamic history and doctrine. Before being cancelled for his condo, he appeared on all major networks: CNN, NPR, PBS, CPAN, Al Jazeera, and was published by New York Times, Los Angeles Times, Chronicle of Higher Education, Washington Post, Financial Times, Jane's Islamic Affair Analytics, and Middle East Quarterly, to name a few. Formerly an Arabic linguist at the Library of Congress, Ibrahim has a guest lectured at many universities, including National Defense Intelligence College and U.S. Army War College, testified before Congress, and spoken before various international bodies and parliaments. Author of over 2,000 published essays, his books including Defenders of the West 2022, Sword and Smita 2018, Crucified Again 2013, and The Al-Qaeda Reader 2007. His newest book is The Sword of the Christ, is set to be released on 25th of November. Those books you can buy the books on Amazon. Please check that out. Also, he's behind YouTube channel Raymond Ibrahim. If you haven't subscribed it, please do so. He will start the debate first, and then Jay Smith will start. Let me introduce Jay Smith for those of you who doesn't know. Dr. Jay Smith has been working with Muslims for over 40 years, 25 of which he and his wife were in London, England, where he went every Sunday when in town to the world-famous Speaker's Corner to discuss and debate publicly with some of the most radical Muslims one could hope to find, and where he cut his teeth using apologetics and polemics. While studying at the School of Oriental and African Studies in 1994 to 1995, Jay took a course on the origins of Islam from Dr. Gerald Hatun. It was at this time that he was first introduced to the problems with Muhammad's existence. He did his first debate on this subject, coupled with the Quran, with Dr. Jamal Badawi in August 1995, and continued his studies on Islam's origin ever since. For the last 4 years, Jay has been the director of 2 years master degree program on apologetic and polemics to Islam at Veritas International Seminar, where much of his new historical material is taught. Most of the research he and his team are finding on the origin of Islam are uploaded onto his YouTube channel, Fanda Films. So if you have not subscribed to Fanda Films, please do so. Debate is gonna taking place as 20 minutes of start with 20 minutes of opening statement. Raymond Ibrahim is gonna go first. Just some practical things. So when I ask when you are ready to go, I will put the timing on the corner. You can both see. I will be giving you 2 minutes notification and then 1 minute, again, reminder. When your time is up, it's up. So I will stop you there, unless like you are close to the dot. Any questions at this stage?
No.
No? Okay. And those of you who are joining us in the chat, as I said, please feel free to bring up your questions, and then make sure you tag the CCI Ministries and make sure you point out who you are asking your question to. So, Raymond Ibrahim, are you ready, sir?
I am.
Okay. Your 20 minutes starts now.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and for Jay participating and Hatun moderating. Okay, the question of Muhammad's existence. 20 minutes is short, so I'm going to jump right into it. I'm going to share with you essentially why I am so compelled that he existed. There's obviously many arguments one can make, and I'm sure they'll arise and counter arguments, and we'll get into it. But for me, the gold standard, the unequivocal reason that Muhammad existed, and not just a figure, but someone who broadly follows the Islamic tradition, is the multiple attestations for him from the 7th century, contemporary, by non-Muslims. Now, why is this important? Historians, when they try to talk about or to determine or ascertain whatever, including, of course, the existence or the nature of a religious figure specifically, they shy away from the writings by that religious figure's community, his disciples, etc. And the logic is they're biased, they're exaggerating, etc., etc. And this, of course, is one of the reasons that the nomos. Nomos is short for me for those who do not believe in Muhammad. It's not a derogatory thing. I'm a yesmo. Okay, I like abbreviation. So the nomos. That's what they do, right? They discount essentially the entire standard Islamic narrative because it's biased and they have an agenda, et cetera, et cetera. Fair enough. Okay, and that's actually, that's what scholars, the Jesus Seminar, et cetera, that's what they did with Christ. They said, okay, we can't follow the New Testament, even though it's very early, so we have to look for what non-believers said. Okay, so for Muhammad, we have a lot, and it's really, really impressive. These are not people who had an agenda. We can't say these are working for an Umayyad or Abbasid, kingdom, and they don't know each other. And they're some are at the time of Muhammad, some are just a few years later. And at some point, I'll get into how important this is, because to those who are not initiated in how history is done, it may seem that 50 years or 100 years is a very long time, but it's actually not in context. Okay, and before I even get into that, I would like to read to you a quote from Patricia Crona. Many of you, of course, if you know anything about, if you believe in the Nomo doctrine, you know, of course, her immense importance to casting much doubt to the early historiographical tradition of Islam, lots of skepticism, etc. Now, here's what she wrote very recently. No, I mean recently as in later than when she wrote her book, Hagerism. I can pull out the date. I think it's 2000, maybe 10-ish or something. She wrote an article called "What Do We Actually Know About Muhammad?" Okay, and here's a few excerpts I'm going to read to you. She writes, quote, "We probably know more about Muhammad than we do about Jesus, let alone Moses or the Buddha." She writes, "There is, quote, there is no doubt that Muhammad existed. His neighbors in Byzantine Syria got to hear of him within 2 years of his death at the latest. A Greek text written during the Arab invasion of Syria between 632 and 634 mentions that a, quote, false prophet has appeared among the Saracens and dismisses him as an impostor on the ground that prophets do not come with, quote, swords and chariots." Okay, and this is the Doctrina Jacobi. Okay, so that right there is so immensely early. And I know there's an issue, the 2 years, well, it talks about him as if he's alive and he's supposed to be dead. That's actually very easily answered. But let's leave it there. And she goes on to say, quote, "If Muhammad is the only founder of a world religion who is attested in a contemporary source. But in any case, this source," and she's talking about the Doctrina Jacobi, which I just summarized, "this source gives us pretty irrefutable evidence that he was an historical figure. Moreover, an Armenian document, probably written shortly after 661, identifies him by name and gives a recognizable account of his monotheistic preaching." And I'd like to read to you a quick an excerpt from this. She's talking about the Armenian, I think he's an archbishop, writing around 660s, again, very, very early. and his name is Cebios. And he writes, quote, "At that time, a certain man from among those same sons of Ishmael, whose name was Muhammad," and I know there's going to be an issue about the name Muhammad, and I'll respond to that at the time, but for now, let's just go with the actual translation, "whose name was Muhammad, a merchant, as if by God's command, appeared to them as a preacher, the path of truth. He taught them to recognize the God of Abraham, especially because he was learned and informed in the history of Moses. Now, because the command had come from on high, they all assembled with their wives and children, and they set out for the land of Palestine, which God had promised," okay, etc. "Muhammad legislated for them not to eat carrion, not to drink wine, not to speak falsely, and not to fornicate." Okay, again, 660s, very, very early, and this was the Thompson translation. Now, just these two, okay, the Doctrina Jacobi and Cebios, not only do they talk and essentially are very early and talk about Muhammad, and one of them names him, but they really conform in the broadest outline to the Islamic tradition, especially Cebios. Cebios says he was a preacher. He says he gave them laws. He says things about banning alcohol. All of this is, of course, consistent with the Muhammad of Islam. And as far as the Doctrina Jacobi, he talks about him as a violent man who's trying to wed violence with preaching the truth of Islam. And of course, in the full text, he says he has the paradise to heaven, etc., etc. And this, of course, is what you would expect non-Muslims to believe about Muslims watching his career, which was one of violence and claiming that God is telling him to do this. But above and beyond these two, there are so many more. Okay, so for example, John of Damascus, who was born around 675, again, very early, and Theodore Abu Qura. They both, again, even more so, name Muhammad explicitly as Muhammad and describe his role as a founder and lawgiver of the Arabs. And they even mention specific doctrines that we do know are part of Islamic teaching, such as the denial of the crucifixion, or Jesus being only a prophet, and that there's a sensual paradise, and all the circumcision, dietary laws. This also comes out. Okay, so the importance of this, just to underscore, these are early multiple various attestations, not from Muslims. We don't have this generally for other historical figures. This is the point. I think one of the things that makes the arguments against Muhammad seem so valid is most people are under the assumption that most historical figures around that time, well, you know, we have their social security card and their ID and their DNA and their fingerprints. No, this is as good as it gets. Okay, most of the characters from this time and even after Muhammad, and I'll give some examples, they're much worse. You get, and we don't doubt them. We don't say they don't exist. We go with what we have, and that's the end of it. Okay, but why do we doubt Muhammad? And I'll get to that, because there's a reason to doubt Muhammad. There's a reason to doubt Jesus, because they actually matter today, whereas historical figures don't. So everything has been brought up against them, even though without appreciating the fact of how tenuous and fragile history is, and the fact that compared to others, they have so much evidence. Now, the other issue is the Sunni and Shia divide. Now, I find it just completely impossible to get beyond this one, especially. For those who don't know, the Sunni-Shia divide is based on the succession of Muhammad. And you have the one group, the minority, the Shias, who are insisting it has to be the bloodline of Muhammad. And then you have the majority, the Sunnis, who say, okay, just the qualified Quraysh chieftain, etc., etc. Now, if this is, first of all, if this is a conspiracy, okay, how did this happen? What are the origins of this? This would require two different groups, Shias and Sunnis, to be at the same time conspirators and at the same time agree to fight and kill each other in perpetuity. Okay, I mean, I'm trying to understand the origins of this, but above and beyond that, at the same time, we again have very early attestations to this, to the Shias and the Sunnis, again, not from Muslim sources, but from Christian sources. Cebios, who I just mentioned from the 660s, talks about early factions and disputes following the life of Muhammad. The Maronite Chronicle, written right around 687, mentions political splits, talks about Muawiyah and how he killed Ali by name. 687, okay? Theophanes the Confessor, writing around 810, mentions Muhammad, of course, as we know, as a false prophet who appointed Abu Bakr after him. And it also talks about the Sunni-Shia split and the killing of Ali. Okay, so this is not something that was created later by Ottomans many, many centuries later and then somehow cast back. That does not make sense. Who would do this? Why would the Fatimids, or I'm sorry, I'll get to the Fatimids, but why would the Sunnis and Shias do all this? To what end? So they can fight each other and kill each other? And they are the Fatimids. So think about them. Now, the Fatimids, that's an empire that arose in North Africa and was mostly centered in Egypt. And it came around in 909, okay, very early. What was their claim to fame? That we are the descendants of Fatima. Who's Fatima? She's the daughter of Muhammad. And of course, she's married to Ali, and their sons Hassan and Hussein, who are supposed to be the progenitors, and the line of the Shias and the line of Muhammad is supposed to go through that. And so where did this come from? And their own enemies, the Sunnis, the Abbasids, accused them or said, yeah, they admitted it. These are people who claim descent from Fatima. And, it's also interesting when I think about it, Fatima, the daughter of Muhammad, if this was all made up, and this reminds me of an actual gospel or Christian apologetic, a lot of Christians will point out, rightfully so, that the testimony of Mary Magdalene and the other women who testified to the risen Christ, it's actually realistic, because why would someone lie that women, why would they cite women as their sources? Because back in those days, patriarchal society, if you're going to lie, you're going to say men saw it, not women. So the reality of it is that women saw it. Why? So why did they go with it? Because it's true. And I think it's the same thing with the Fatima argument. If you're going to make all this up, wouldn't you create descent through a male line, not a daughter, Fatima, the daughter of Muhammad? Well, again, so if anything, this strengthens the idea. And honestly, this kind of thing, I see parallels with the sort of Christian polemics and apologetics. So I know Jay's going to talk about Mahmat, MHMT. And these are the sorts of arguments, and I'll get to it at the other point, but this reminds me of Muslims claiming the paraclete is Muhammad, okay? So there is definitely a little parallel going on with both religions when it comes to the sorts of attacks that are going on. Then there's, of course, I mentioned this before, but the arguments from, that the hadith and the seerah are really not flattering. If I'm going to be some Arab king and I'm going to codify and create some sorts of stories to help create a hagiographical veneer to justify my empire, the hadith and the seerah are just full of really unflattering things. Now, I've heard the excuse for this is that we moderns just don't understand, but everything that's embarrassing in the hadith actually was good, or for the people in the 7th, 8th, 9th century, they thought that was good. Yeah, I beg to differ, okay? I mean, maybe there's a few things that we can say like that, but there's really troubling things that from the start, Muslims have had major issues with. For example, and Christians, of course, caught on to them and used them in their polemics from the very start, such as Muhammad, seeing Zainab, the wife of his adopted son, Zayd, and all of a sudden he wants her, and then a revelation comes, and all of a sudden he gets her. Or Aisha, his young bride, telling him, it's interesting, all these revelations that just show up and always validate your desires. And then, I've talked about things like Al-Zut, where, Muhammad goes out in the desert and all of a sudden these tall, naked, dark men, as they're described, start mounting him. Ibn Kathir ends up saying this is a very strange and bizarre hadith. So I don't think you can just say, oh, we just don't get it. This is actually all positive stuff about Muhammad and we don't understand it. There's another one where, there's a dead woman in the grave and he jumps in and lays with her. And the people scream and say, what are you doing, Prophet? And he says, oh, this is to help assuage the comfort or the discomfort of the grave. Now, I'd like to, again, emphasize why the arguments against Muhammad's existence seem so strong. It's because they're being pulled out of context and presented in a vacuum. And most people are under the impression that apparently every historical figure, we just have so much documentation and it's written the day they died. And it's not like that. What I just told you about those 7th century Christian sources, that is really rare. That's gold. And that's why it's a little irking for me when they're just like, oh, forget about them. They're in the way. So let's ignore these. And I can give you multiple historical characters of how this applies. Alexander the Great, by any stretch of the imagination, much more important than Muhammad for his time. So you would expect tons of evidence or of documentary evidence for Alexander the Great, because he was the greatest conqueror at the time, who conquered a large swath of the world from Southeast Europe, Macedonia till India. and he founded, the Hellenism and all that. Big character. Well, guess what? He lived in the 330, I think he died BC, and the oldest little writing about him is maybe 300 years later, or 250 years later. And then the full biography comes in the 2nd century AD. Arian and Plutarch, or actually even later. We're talking like 500-600 years. So do we say, okay, based on that, Alexander the Great doesn't exist? How about ancient history? Do you realize that almost everyone we know from ancient history, as in Alexander the Great, but before him, comes from one guy named Herodotus, who lived like in the 5th century BC, and who we know absolutely nothing about, and whose account is half full of the fabulous and the mythical? Okay, so I mean, if you use these standards that I'm hearing against Muhammad, the whole of history has to go. No one's safe. No one gets out alive. No one exists anymore. Okay, but let's even move past Muhammad. There's characters like William Wallace, Braveheart. Well, you know what? Pivotal character, national hero, Scotland, etc. There's like a couple of really vague writings about him, maybe years after he died, but his real account comes about 200 years later. All right. Clovis the First, who's almost a contemporary of Muhammad, a little before him. Harold Hardrada, okay, an important character, Battle of Hastings, Viking king. In fact, all the Vikings that we know, who are supposed to be very active, and we know them by name, and no one doubts their existence, who were around in the 8th and 9th and 10th centuries, they all come from one guy in Iceland, Snorri Sturluson, who was writing many centuries later. Okay, so if you want to go by this argument, the whole thing ends. Nobody can exist. So this is the trick, I would say, is that most people don't know what I'm talking about. They just assume history is so firm, but Muhammad, there's all kinds of issues. And so we have to, but that's not the case. Muhammad is actually very firm. I just read to you what Patricia Crone said. Keep in mind, she is the person who literally wrote the book, Casting Doubt on Early Islamic History. I don't think she ever went to the point to doubt him, but she really created, she's the one who trailblazed in many ways this field. She and Cook in her book, the book Hagarism. And here she is flat out saying, yeah, of course he exists, based on the same sorts of arguments that I'm trying to give. And, I mean, if you really want to go with all this, because I think one of the greatest arguments against the Muhammad is this idea that all the texts come much later. And so we have to ignore them. But I just gave you many examples of how that is the case. Think about Caesar. Okay, he's a well-known, attested, and we're lucky. We have his actual commentaries that he wrote when he was in Gaul. But guess what? The actual extant manuscript we have is about 800 years after him. So if we're going to also create a new rule where we go by the extant existing manuscript and not agree that, well, it's based on something older, then Caesar's also a myth, and he just came out of the blue, and it's all lies. Okay. And think how far we can take this idea. What about the Old Testament? I know Jay's a Christian, so am I. What do we do with the fact that the oldest Old Testament that we have, which I guess are fragments, the Dead Sea Scrolls, are about 1,000 years after Moses lived, and yet Moses is supposed to be the author of the first 5 books, the Pentateuch. Okay, by these same standards that I hear against Islam, doesn't that make Moses disappear, let alone everyone before him, from Adam and Eve all the way to him? So I think we need to do doing here that you can shoot holes at Muhammad, but you can shoot holes at everyone. And that's what people don't seem to be aware of. And if anything, Muhammad is on pretty secure ground based on the fact that we have so much non-Muslim sources, contemporary, that in the broad outline talk about a violent prophet who claims he's promising paradise, he's a lawgiver. And we have multiple attestations to the Sahaba, Abu Bakr, Ali, the Sunni thing. Think about it. You have people today banging their head with swords on Ashura, the Shias, commemorating the death of Hassan and Hussein. And who are they? Well, they're the descendants of Muhammad. I mean, it's really hard and mind-boggling for me. So the bottom line is, the only reason that we're even talking about Muhammad because the bar of existence has been raised impossibly high for him and only for him. It was also done for Jesus. And again, the reason is because nobody cares about disproving Alexander the Great. Nobody cares about disproving ancient history. They have no more relevance, okay? But when it comes to religious figures, Jesus and Muhammad, yeah, they matter. And there's people who want to take them out. And so we play this game as if, oh, look, the evidence for them is so shaky, when it's really not in context of everyone else. So if you use this same frame of reference, or if you do the same critiques and the same methodical and just scrutinize everything that we see with Muhammad, every last coin, every parchment, every existing piece of architecture, if you were to do that, everyone has to disappear in history, and that's the point. And I don't think many people get that, which is why that is my number one reason
1 minute.
Muhammad existed. And also the Sunni Shia split. I just find it's too hard to imagine that you got two groups who are co-conspirators, and their conspiracies about fighting each other and teaching their kids to kill each other. And I'll stop right there.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. You still had almost 40 seconds.
Oh, I see 1 second.
No, you had 34 seconds.
Oh.
I just stopped. I can give you 40 seconds if you want.
How about if you can save them for later, if I need them?
I'll think about it.
Okay.
Okay. So I can see because of the internet connection, the time your lips are moving and when you are quiet, it's like kind of not syncing. But hopefully we won't have much problem on that. Okay. Sir, thank you very much for your opening statement. Jay Smith, I'll unmute you. Sir, whenever you are ready, your time will start. Are you ready? Okay, your time starts.
Yeah, let me thank you for having this debate, Hatun. Thank you for being the moderator. Thank you, Raymond, for coming on board and for challenging me to this. Otherwise, I would never have done a debate on this subject. There's a reason why. This is not the subject that's ready for debate. I have always said there are three problems with the origins of Islam: the book, the man, and the place. The book, the Quran; the man, Muhammad; and the place, Mecca. But I always would have started with Mecca first. You always start with Mecca because no one's going to kill you if you start talking about Mecca. Then I would have gone to the Quran. In fact, I'm going to be doing a debate in January with a Muslim scholar on the Quran. It'll probably be my 6th or 7th debate with Muslim scholars on the Quran. I'm more than willing to debate the Quran. But Muhammad, you do not touch Muhammad. You do not touch Muhammad. We have seen what happens when you touch Muhammad. My good friend, Robert Spencer, who's listening right now, actually wrote a book on this very title, Did Muhammad Exist? And when he wrote that book, twice now he's been killed, tried to be killed. Once in 2015 in Texas, there was 2 men who came with guns to kill him. Had there not been an off-duty policeman who drove up just at that time and shot them both, he would be dead today because he dared to question Muhammad and dared to put together some cartoons on Muhammad. In 2017, they tried to kill him by poisoning him in Norway. So twice they've tried to kill him just because he wrote that book, Did Muhammad Exist? Which is the title of this debate. So you can see why I'm not all that excited to be doing a debate on this subject. However, because of the 2 videos you put up in April, and also everybody throwing these videos at me, say, have you seen this? This guy's taking you on. Finally, you have someone of substance. And Ibrahim, Raymond, I do. You are a man of substance. I've got your book right here. Thank you for all the great work you're doing. Listen, anybody, I would encourage you to read that book. Raymond is someone of substance. There are many people that would like to debate me on many subjects. I don't debate anybody that comes down the road, but I do like to debate you because I trust you. And also because you are fair. And when your comeback on what I did on was it July the 6th, your comeback was perfectly legitimate. I did put my material together that I didn't quote you exactly, and I apologized for that. That was a fair assessment. But however, because of the fact that then you demanded that I do a debate, and I think while you were doing that video, while you were recording it, Hatun got on the phone and said, Jay, we'll do a debate with you. That's why we're having this today. So in some ways, I'm coming into the whole idea of origins of Islam coming in backwards. I really wish you and I had a debate on Mecca first, because you seem to dismiss Mecca. And you casually do so without looking at the evidence that we have against Mecca. The problem is this, Raymond. You're going to find lots of references in the 7th century, as you've said. And listen, we did a video just a week ago, about a week and a half ago. Mel, who is one of my best researchers, Mel from Islamic Origins, that's his YouTube site. And we went through 30 of these references, including the 3 that you went through. And I'll go through those 3 in the rebuttal. I'm not going to do them now because I really want this to be the opening statement. But we went through 30 of these, and I want to thank Mary Harb, who is the one that actually listed them all out for us so that we could do that. And we went through each one of them and showed that there is a problem with each one of them. And I'm going to, in the rebuttal, I'll explain the problem for you. I'm not going to do that now, Raymond, because this is not something, this is my opening statements, and I really want to keep it to the opening statements. But in order to find the Muhammad of Islam, that's why this debate, that's why we've named it this title. Did the Muhammad of Islam exist? Not any Muhammad. Not anybody named Muhammad or somebody named Muhammad or anybody in the 7th century. Did the Muhammad of Islam, who was born in Mecca in 570, who lived in Mecca for 52 years, who then moved to Medina between from 622 to 632 for the last 10 years of his life, and during that period from 610 to 632 received a book called the Quran, and it's not just bits and pieces, it has to be all 114 surahs. All of these, this man who lived in that place receiving that book all before 632, did that Muhammad exist? That's the Muhammad I'm looking for, and that's the Muhammad I'm confronting. No other Muhammads. And in the rebuttal, I'll show you some of the real problems that you are having with, because you really haven't looked at the original text of most of those references that you're using. And we've gone through all 30, and you've got to go back to the original text. But that's for the rebuttal. I'll come back to that later. Now, here's your problem, Raymond. You're going to have to prove to me that that Muhammad existed. And also, I know there are a lot of Muslims who are watching this debate right now. And you're going to have to prove to them, you're going to have to defend for them that Muhammad. They're not going to accept somebody who came with a sword, who was happened to be way up in the north, who did all these terrible ravaging things all across Jordan and Syria and Iraq. They're not going to accept that Muhammad, because that's not the Muhammad of Islam. You've got to defend their Muhammad. That's your job. And you have the much harder task, Raymond, because that's the Muhammad we're asking. That's what everybody wants to know. Did that Muhammad exist? Not just somebody who may, even someone who was called Muhammad, because that's really what it is in Arabic in the 7th century. But did that Muhammad who fulfilled those 4 criteria, lived in Mecca, received the Quran, and also all 114 surahs, and was named Muhammad, and did all of this before 632 AD. Now, when you look at all these references that you have come up with, yes, there's myriads of them. But the problem is what you're doing, and this is what I see everybody doing. This is what Robert Hoyland did with this book here. This is a great book. This is probably the classic one, Seeing Islam as Others Saw It. And what you have done, and what many people are doing, is that you're taking a view of Muhammad and imposing it on the texts. Many of the texts that Robert Hoyland refers to, that all of the people that you're going to come up with, the 30 plus people that you're going to come up with, in almost every case, you're taking what they're saying, or what Wikipedia is saying, or what people in today say. Even Patricia Corona made this mistake. And I'll get back to Patricia Corona because I knew her personally. She was my supervisor when I first started my PhD. And in fact, she was the one that prepared my debate for me in 1995 against Dr. Jamal Badawi. Not on this subject, fortunately, it was on the Quran itself. But see, that's why most of us as historians, and you're a good historian, that's why I love, because your material, it's amazing what you do on the internet. And you do an awful lot of great expose on what is happening historically, what has happened historically. I only find a problem with your origins historical difficult exposition. That's the only problem I have a problem with you on. But in every time, you always go back to the text of that century. You always go back to the time period of that century, and you quote people from that century. You're trying to do that here now. The difficulty is you're not really going to the original text, and that's what you need to do. And I'll show you some examples of that in my rebuttal time. Now, until you can prove to me, and until you can prove to the Muslims who are watching you, that you can come up with that Muhammad, the Muhammad who received the Quran, lived for at least 52 years in this place called Mecca. And Mecca really, it is what it's really coming down to. It always starts with Mecca. And the reason why Mecca is so important is because if you find a Muhammad anywhere else but not Mecca, it's not the Muhammad of Islam. If you find any other book that even refers to itself as the Quran, if it doesn't come from Mecca or Medina, it's not the Quran of Islam. You've got to start with Mecca. And I don't think you have really looked strong at Mecca. When you look at Mecca, you're going to have to say that this place just has no historical support for it at all. Not until 741. 741, that's the first time we even see it referred to any document. The Apocalypse of Pseudo-Methodius Arabica, which is ironically is the one that was really introduced by Patricia Corona in Meccan Trade and the Rise of Islam in 1987. And that reference that she found in the Pseudo-Methodius is actually places that Mecca way up in southern Turkey. It's even in the wrong place. We don't see it on any map until the 9th century. I'm sorry, the 10th century, until 900s. There is no reference to it by anybody prior to the 7th century. And Patricia Corona has been really helpful with me on this because we have worked together on this, and she was the one that helped me with this very, very early on, back in the last century. It makes me look old. I am old. Look at me. I'm gray-haired. This is my birthday today. 72 years old today. So because of Patricia Corona, because of what she did, and because of her really underlying work on the problem with Mecca, everything else comes out of whack. But more than that, she also confronted the whole tradition surrounding how Islam began. In other words, the story behind how Islam began. And to understand the story, you need to go to the sources for the story. So everything you're going to talk about this Muhammad, everything you're going to refer to him, everything you know about this Muhammad, and I would say that's the case for all. There's over 1,000 people who are watching us right now on our 2 channels. I just checked it before I came on. For all of you who are watching right now, that Muhammad that you're talking about comes from a certain source or a number of sources, and they're from 4 different genres. One is known as the Sirah, which is the biography of Muhammad, so that's pretty important because that says what he does. The other would become from the Hadith, which would be the sayings of Muhammad, and that's pretty prolific because much of the Hadith do refer to an awful lot about what Muhammad did: walk, talk, eat, drink, sleep. And for Muslims who are watching, to know how you're to walk, talk, eat, drink, and sleep, you need to follow the Prophet's example. And then you have 2 other genres. One is called tafsir, which would be the commentaries that help unpack the Quran, because it's so opaque. There's so much, it just doesn't make sense. You need the tafsir, the commentaries. And then the last would be the tahriq, which would be the histories. Now, almost all of what we know about this man and that place and everything that happened on the origins of Islam come from those 4 sources. But those 4 sources, and you have claimed this, Raymond, a number of times, and you've been correct for what you know, and that all of these sources are perfectly legitimate, because though they are not right from the time of Muhammad, they aren't even from the century of Muhammad or the century after Muhammad. They start to appear in the 9th and 10th century, and you've made that very clear. And most people have just walked away from that and said, well, that's not a problem. It's a huge problem. It's a huge problem. Because I would throw right back on your lap, Raymond, where is the manuscripts for any of those that you're talking about? Where is the manuscript for Ibn Hisham or Al-Waqidi? That's the Sirah. Where is your manuscript for Al-Bukhari or Sahih Muslim or Ibn Dawud or Tirmidhi or Majah or Nisai? Those are the 6 major manuscripts for compilations of the Hadith. Where are your manuscripts for any of these guys? Where is your manuscript for the Tafsir and the Tahriq, the Al-Tabari or Baidawi or Suyuti or Zamakhshari? Where are their original manuscripts? See, that's what no one's talking about. And you should be more acute to that, because as Christians, we've been asked the same questions for the last 200 years. Where are our original manuscripts from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, or for Paul's letters? This is something we've all had to study in the seminary. You've had to study it. I had to study it. And so we're very aware of the need to get into this whole area of looking at exactly what these people said. Because until you have a manuscript, it could be just hearsay. It could be just people assuming that they know what this man said or did. There's no eyewitness account. There is no eyewitness account to this man at all in the 7th century. Notice, you've been very clear that these are nomos. The nomos are only dependent. That's me, I'm a nomo. They are all dependent on sources that are outside of Islam. You made that very clear. Why is there not one source from within Islam for this man in that time and in that place? Not one source. Now, you can say, well, because they lost it, maybe they were inept. Hold on a minute. We're talking about only 1,400 years ago. We're talking about a time period where the caliphs were the ones that actually commissioned these men. These men were all in the courts of the caliph. Ibn Hisham, Al-Waqidi, Sahih Bukhari, they were all in the caliphal courts. They didn't come from Baghdad, but they were in Baghdad in the 9th and 10th century. They wrote it down. And when you're at the caliphal courts, you're not dependent on what we were dependent on papyrus. See, all of our Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all of our manuscripts were dependent on papyrus. Those are just interlocking leaves that disintegrate within 100 years. That the Muslims cannot excuse. They cannot make that excuse because there is plenty of parchment and vellum in the 9th and 10th century, especially in the caliphal courts, who at that time controlled all the way from Spain, from just below Spain at that time, all the way to India, and from Turkey all the way to Yemen. They were the second biggest superpower of their day. They certainly had access to parchment and vellum. Look at the earliest manuscripts of the Quran that we have, the 6 major manuscripts. The 6 major ones, the Topkapi, the Samarkand, the Ma'il, the Petropolitanus, the Huzeni, and the Sana manuscript. Look at those 6 major manuscripts. They're all written on parchment. None of them are written on papyrus. So you can't make that excuse that they just lost them or they just disintegrated. The 5 manuscripts are supposed to be written by Uthman. Where are those 5 that were sent to Basra, Baghdad, Damascus, and 2 were left in Mecca and Medina? Give me one. Show me one. We're only talking about 1400 years ago. See, as Christians, we know how to answer a question like that because we can go back to the Sinaiticus, the Alexandrinus, the Vaticanus. These are 3 metropolitan codices that are from the 4th and 5th century. That is 200 to 300 years before the 7th century, and they are complete. And they're still there for us to look at. Why can't the Muslims come up with one manuscript of what the prophet said or did? Not just one. It gets even worse. It gets even worse. Maybe you don't know what's happened in the last month. Have you been following what's going on? 2 of the world's leading scholars, Dr. Yasir Qadhi and Dr. Shabir Ali, the 2 world's leading scholars, Dr. Yasir Qadhi, I've tussled with him. We've had debates before. He's called me ultra-crepidarian. He did a whole hour's video on me and David Wood and Dr. Dan Brubaker because we're ultra-crepidarians, because we didn't realize, we didn't think what we were talking about. And the reason he was so angry with this is because Hatun, sitting right up there, Hatun, you can blame her for everything because she was the first to actually introduce and show the whole world that there's not one Quran, there's 30 different Qurans, no 2 are alike. Now, Dr. Yasir Qadhi is probably the world's leading authority, and I say that because he has a foot in both worlds. He is the first to get a degree from Medina University, the foremost university in the Muslim world, on Hadith sciences, on what the Prophet said and what the Prophet did. So he is the first to get the best degree you can get in the world on Hadith sciences. He is also the first in the world to simultaneously, or soon after that, in this century, get a PhD from Yale University in historical criticism. So he covers both camps, the best you can get in Medina and in Yale. You can probably get better than Yale, but that's one of the best you can get in historical criticism. And he was asked just on July 9th, so just a little over a month ago, he was asked this question: what about historical criticism when it comes to the Prophet Muhammad, when it comes to what he said and did? And he had an answer. And this was his answer: no one in the academy, in the Western Academy, affirms the Muslim Sunni science of Hadith. Nobody. It is considered to be completely discredited. So now, put your head around that, Raymond. He said this publicly just a little over a month ago. And then he went on to say, I would love for somebody to say that we can prove the Hadith via the historical critical method. I would thank that person and be the first to buy his book. As yet, I do not think that we can do that to the Hadith literature. Those are exact quotes that he said in that was just on July 9th. Now, because of that, Dr. Shabir Ali, I've debated Shabir Ali 6 times. He is a good friend of mine, probably considered to be probably the best Muslim debater in the English-speaking world today, which means the world today, because most debates are in English. And he then had to do a review. His daughter, Dr. Safiya Ali, had him come up, and and she asked him about this. And he says, listen, I can understand the problem for what Yasir Qadhi said. I can understand. Now, I'm going to get into this a little bit deeper when I get into the rebuttals, because I see I only have 2.5 minutes to go. But here you have 2 scholars in just the last month who are now admitting publicly that historical criticism discredits what Muhammad said and did, and that everything they're dependent on is dependent on oral tradition. I'm going to get into that because he went and did another, on July 31st, he went and did another live stream where he tried to explain what he meant by that, and he just put himself into a deep water. But that's something for later on. But this is what I'm going to come back to you, Raymond.
So
Can you then understand why we're questioning Muhammad's existence? because the Muhammad that you are dependent on to interpose, and I would say you are imposing on these references from the 7th century, that Muhammad comes from the standard Islamic narrative, that standard Islamic narrative that you're using to define the Muhammad that you're trying to defend, and you have to defend him. I don't. I have the easy job. I don't have to prove a thing. You have to prove he existed. But what you're going to do is you're going to have to prove to me that that Muhammad that is from the standard Islamic narrative is actually historical. That Muhammad that you're going to look at, that Muhammad that you're going to prove, not just to me, but to all the Muslims listening to you. And I'm going to ask you at the end of this debate, and I'm going to look at the Muslims and ask the Muslims, is that the Muhammad that you are following? Is that the Muhammad that you're happy with? The Muhammad that Raymond's giving you? Because, well, we're going to find as we go through this debate that we're actually saying much the same thing. I do believe that there probably was somebody, Muhammad or Mahmud, in the 7th century. I think I've come pretty close to you on that. And I'm willing to say it. I've said it many times. I do believe there was someone, because at some point they had to hang this person on something. And I'm even willing to say, as we close out, that possibly that Muhammad, or that Muhammad, though it's not the Muhammad of Islam, and he did not live in Mecca, he lived way up in the north, even received something of what became later the Quran. But that is not what Muslims are saying. And that's not the Muhammad you have to defend. And that's not the Muhammad that is the Muhammad of Islam, because no Muhammad, no Muslim would accept that definition of Muhammad. I'm glad I'm not in your shoes, because now I want you to defend that. And I want you to prove in the next, 30 minutes, if you can defend that Muhammad who came from Mecca, received the Quran, 114 surahs, and did so before 632 AD.
Your time is up, sir. Thank you very much. So that was the 20 minutes of opening statement from both sides. We will be moving to first round of 10 minutes of rebuttal. Those of you who are joining us on YouTube channel Raymond Ibrahim, it's good that you are there. Please, if you've got any questions, you must put DCCI. You must tag DCCI Ministries and then tell me who you are asking your questions. Otherwise, I won't be picking up your questions from this side, just for the practical reasons. And then, yeah, other than it should be okay. So we will take your questions after the closing statements. So feel free to send them in when you are ready. And Raymond Ibrahim, your 10 minutes can start for your first rebuttal. Let me know whenever you are ready. Let me unmute you, sir, first. Sorry.
Yeah, just be sure to give me a 1 minute, because the way I see it, both for me and Jay, it's different than what it really is. I guess because of this lag that's going on.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, I will give you 1 minute warning.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay, your time starts.
Okay. Thank you, Jay. You've said a whole lot of things, and unfortunately, I'm trying to take notes, and because I may forget, and at some point, if I forget to answer something, by all means, if Hatun wants to raise it, or if you do later, please do so. Okay. The burden of proof. You make this argument that I have to prove it, or Muslims have to prove it. And technically speaking, you're right. Those who have something that exists, the burden of proof is on them. But in this case, I don't think it really matters. I don't think it's applicable. Muslims don't feel compelled or the need to prove anything to you or me, okay? They've given us the da'wah. They've called us to Islam. A guy like me says, yeah, I believe your prophet exists, but I think he was a false prophet. And they shrug their arms and go, okay, kafir. A guy like you says, yeah, I believe he didn't even exist at all. They shrug their shoulders, kafir. Same thing. So technically, I don't think there's any burden of proof on them, because I think there's a bit of conflation going on when you talk about these things. And we are forgetting that there's the faith element, especially from the Muslim side. They approach this through the lens of faith, which is why so many of these arguments just fall on deaf ears, as I'm sure you've experienced with Muslims. Okay, so that's to the burden of proof. And when you mentioned again, and you mentioned that the standard Islamic narrative, SIN, that's a good acronym, by the way. But you mentioned how it's so much later. Okay, but I mean, we still know things like al-Muwatta. We have fragments of it, and it talks about Muhammad, and it's old. Okay, so it's not really as bad. And again. And you mentioned the New Testament. We have a lot of manuscripts, and they're very close to the events, etc., which I agree. But you still haven't mentioned the Old Testament. Christians believe in the Old Testament. Jews believe in the Old Testament. the actual accusations or the criticisms that you are raising about lateness apply much more to the Old Testament than these hadith and these seerah. I've already mentioned that the fragments of the Dead Sea are 1,000 years after the time they were supposedly written by Moses. So if we were to go by your logic, then of course the whole Old Testament's gone. We have to just discard it, as I've heard you say about the standard Islamic narrative based on its age. So again, let's not compare apples with oranges. If you want to talk about oldness and biblical scripture, we should talk about the Old Testament vis-a-vis the standard Islamic narrative. You also, you were talking about oral traditions, and I think people don't really appreciate the power of oral tradition because of who we are nowadays. A guy like me, I remember as a child, until this day, I remember my home number, my phone number, and I remember my address when I was like 6 years old, because my parents put it in my head. I can't forget it. But now I forget my own phone number. I have to actually look it up because it's been saved. And I think all of us have, to a certain degree, have become so, our memory's gone. We don't really use it. But these older cultures, especially the Arabs, who did everything in rhyme and verse, oral tradition was a real thing. And not just the Arabs, the Irish, the Vikings, the Greeks, the Iliad, all that. Again, the arguments you're using, they are not specific, and just Islam's not the only one that is weak against it. That's everything. All of history is like that. So once again, it just seems that you're raising the bar very, very high for Islam, whereas everything else can get a pass. And then that way Islam looks like the weak one. Okay. I don't know, you haven't mentioned it, but I do want to mention it because it's really important. The Muhammad name. So, I mentioned the 7th century attestations of Muhammad, and some of them use the name, of course. Doctrine of Yacobi doesn't, but Sibios does. John of Damascus does. His Theodore Abu Qura does. And what I've heard you talk about, okay, so there's the Muhammad, the without the vowels, which is because it was a nascent language, and that's true. It's very hard. I used to work at the Library of Congress. I was called in to try to decipher Kufic Quran script, which is essentially the same thing, and it is very hard to read. I get it. There's no diacritics. There's no nothing. But that's, again, a reflection of a nascent language coming into being, okay? So, but it's not, I don't think this, and the other thing people need to understand, I've heard the argument that Mahmud, M-H-M-D, means the praised one. Well, it does, absolutely, okay? But guess what? Every single Arabic name means something laudatory. Okay, we know Ahmed, which is kind of a cognitive. It also means praised one. Kareem, the generous one. Abdullah, the servant or slave of God. Every single Arabic name means something laudatory that you could, if you look hard enough, maybe find some reference somewhere to Christ with that name. So it's not as compelled. This isn't some kind of strange coincidence that Muhammad's name just so happens to mean the praised one. Every name has a meaning in Arabic like that. But in the case of what we're talking about, which is the Christian sources, primarily Greek, they're actually exactly what they write is Muhammad. So John of Damascus, he writes Mamed. Well, yeah, because he's writing in Greek, and there's no H in Greek. So he can't write Muhammad. It becomes Mamed. And we know that's Muhammad because then Abu Qura uses Muhammad in Greek, and then he uses the Arabic Muhammad, just the way it's written. Okay, so this is the name of Muhammad. And it just seems people get tripped up on the difference between translation and transliteration. All right, translation, of course, is if you take a word and explain what it means. So, okay, I'll give you an example. In Arabic, kalb means dog. I just translated it into English. I said kalb means dog. Now, if I were to transliterate it, I would take the word kalb and spell it K-A-L-B, which would be unintelligible to English speakers, but I've tried to spell it and approximate the way it sounds, okay? So the name of Muhammad till this day, do you know how many ways it's being written? It used to be M-A-H-O-M-E-T, okay? And then there's 2 M's, and then there's ones that start with an O and end with an E or end with an A. So that is not something to get, tripped up on at all. And we have it till this very day. I still write Quran, K-O-R-A-N, but of course you should do it Q-U-R'-A-N. So, when you look at these early 7th century Greek and possibly Latin, of course the transliteration can be anything. And that doesn't really tell us anything at all. It's still legit. It's Muhammad because we know it by the way he's being described, which again falls in line very much with the Islamic narrative. And then a lot of the things that you say, Jay, you know, it's you talk about, okay, Mecca, and you kind of create and presuppose criteria, and you make it sound like it's essential, but it's kind of your own doing. So, you know, the Mecca thing, I don't get tripped up on that. It could be any number of things. I believe the map that you rely on seems to be Ptolemy's map, or iterations of it. And so it could be that, well, it was made before Mecca even really came into being. It could be that he's wrong. Maps can be wrong. They didn't have Google Map back then. They didn't have Wikipedia. They didn't have the internet. People need to understand the horrible conditions that these people are working under, which is why everything is fragmented, which is why everything seems wrong and contradictory. But historians, what they do is they try to piece it together, understanding that's the name of the game, not use it as an excuse to say, ha, it's a polemic now. Now that guy doesn't exist, which is sort of what's happening. And I'm okay with that as long as it's a polemic against Islam. And I hope to get to that point, because I think this is the most important point, which is this is a very audience-specific doctrine. And it's kind of gone off the rails. So I'll get to that too. Yeah. So when you talk about Mecca, or you talk about, you know, some years are off, or I've even seen the argument, oh, that can't be Muhammad because it's pronounced, there's a D, not a T. I mean, come on. Historians know much better. We know this is how it is with transliterations that go back centuries for every historical character, and the way their name is written and the way they're presented. Or I've heard, well, whoa, they call them the Taye, not the Arabs, or they call them the Saracens, or they never call them Muslim. Well, again, this is nothing to get tripped up on at all. Up until the Crusader era, they wouldn't call them Muslims, but we do know that Christian theologians talked about Islam and talked about him, but they called them the Saracens, because this is how people actually spoke. If you were a Christian, everyone's an infidel, and you don't really care about learning the inner workings of their doctrines. So you would call them their national designation: Saracens, Hagarenes, Ishmaelites, whatever was the name at the time. Muslims still, this is the very day, do it. The radical Muslims, they call Christians Nasara, okay, because that's the Quranic name. And because apparently, I don't know if it's the etymology goes to Nazareth or whatever the case mean, but they know that Christians in Arabic are called Messihiyin, from the Semitic Messiah, the Christians, but they intentionally call Nasara. Does that mean Christians don't exist? So I'm just trying to, remember a lot of these arguments that I've heard and try to give them some meaning. But I think, hopefully I've answered a lot of what you brought up. And if I didn't, I'll be happy to in the other round. I see 23 seconds. I don't know how much time I really have. Is it 23?
Yeah.
Okay. And yeah, so that's it. Again, I can't get over the fact that every argument that you can make about maps, about coins, if you dig down deep enough, you can do it about almost every historical character from that era.
Your time is up. Thank you very much, sir. That was the first rebuttal from Raymond Ibrahim, and then Jay Smith will respond to that with his 10 minutes. Those of you who are joining us on Raymond Ibrahim's YouTube channel, please tag DCCI Ministries and then tell us who you are asking your question, so I can ask them at the end. Jay Smith, your 10 minutes will start whenever you are ready.
Okay, I'm ready.
Go.
Right, so let's go through, and this is where I'm going to start getting the rebuttals in. So you talk about the 7th century attestations, many attestations, and you say it's not important where these are. If you notice, every one of these attestations, look and see where they're placed. In every case, they're placed, the person who is speaking either has them in Gaza or Jerusalem or Damascus or in Kufa, which used to be Hira, or up in what is today Tikrit, up in northern Iraq. So they're all in places like Israel or Gaza, which is in Palestine, or up in Syria or in Iraq. Isn't that interesting? Not one of these people placed this character, if you want to call him Muhammad or Muhammad, don't place him where he should be, in Mecca. Nowhere in Mecca, way up in the north. Now, what's interesting, you went on and you did talk about, well, whether we call him Muhammad or Muhammad. Now, remember, what is Muhammad? Muhammad is a very well-known word. It actually is a title. It's been around since 1400 BC. The Ugaritic was introduced there. It's in your Old Testament, 11 times in Hebrew. Hebrew borrowed it from the Ugaritic. It's the same 4 letters that you see for Muhammad that we use today. And it's actually when you look at the Old Testament, look at Song of Solomon 5:16. There is the altogether lovely one. So he is known as the praised one, the blessed one, the anointed one, the altogether lovely one. In the 4th century, we have the Saint Ambrose, who then took what Origen had said a century earlier and applied that Muhammad, the same word that you see in Syriac, that Muhammad, to the Messiah, the title for the Jesus Christ, the Messiah, which was then appropriated by about 4 other church fathers that came after it. So by the 7th century, it was well known in Arabic as the Messiah of the praise. So it is a title. Now, whether you like that or not, we can't sit there and just say we must not look at what these men are saying. You made a big thing of whether you go with a D or with a T. Actually, it does make a big difference whether it's a D or a T, because if it's with a D, that's the Arab spelling. If it's with a T, that's the Persian spelling. So that's where you can place it. That's why it's important that you do get the right 4 letters and you put it in the right place. You talked about Patricia Corona, that she didn't really talk. In fact, she was quite willing to say there was a Muhammad. Well, that's perfectly okay, because she never really confronted Muhammad. That was not her area of expertise. Her area of expertise was looking at Mecca. That's why she wrote Hagerism and Meccan Trade and the Rise of Islam. And then she went into Roman law after that. Now, she died in 2015. If she would now be here today, she would be right with us, because we're now turning our attention to Muhammad. We didn't do so earlier than that. That's why I said I'm not ready to do this debate yet. Now, when you go back to the Sunni Shia, that bothered you an awful lot of bit, and it bothers you because it's a problem today. It's a huge problem today that you just can't figure out how that could have started without thinking, when is the first time that this is even referred to? Where is the first time that we hear about the Sunni Shia divide? It actually comes from al-Bukhari. Now, you say that al-Bukhari is someone you can trust. Let me just put this up here. I wish I had a bigger screen. But see, you have always assumed that al-Bukhari comes from this time period here, the 9th and 10th century, right? We don't have anything written by al-Bukhari until some fragments start to appear in the 11th century. And what's fascinating, we don't have a complete al-Bukhari. The al-Bukhari you're reading that talks about the Sunni Shiite comes from the 14th and 15th century, way over here. That's 700 years after Muhammad. That's the Bukhari that you're now talking about, the Shiite-Sunni divide. If you want to talk about the Sirah of Muhammad, which supposedly came from Ibn Ishaq, no, we don't have any of that, from Ibn Hisham. So you say Ibn Ishaq or Ibn Hisham are right here. We don't have any manuscript that even appears from the Sirah until the 11th century. We have 5 other manuscripts that appear from the 13th to the 16th century, but were not put together into the Sirah that we use today until Wustenfeld put it together in 1860. That's 160 years ago. So the man that you're looking for, the man that you're dependent on for the Sunni Shiite divide, comes from actually a German scholar who put that in there and used that part as a very powerful part to show why is it that you have these 2 different political problems. Because really, the Sunni Shiite is not a theological problem, it's a political problem, which is normal when you have people trying to find out who takes the mantle of the prophet. And you have the Persians and the Arabs. And it's during the Abbasid period that this comes to a fruition, because the Abbasids are not in the line of the prophet. That's why they put into their reference the need to make sure that it came from the ulema and it did not come from the prophet's line. Now, that then was engrossed, and of course you would see that became embellished, and there was the enormous amount of accretions and deletions and corruptions from the 9th century, because I'm sure there was someone named al-Bukhari, but the fact that we don't have any of his documents is because there have been so many accretions and deletions until he was finally put together in the form we have today in the 14th and 15th century, the 9 volumes that we use. So that shows that this was used to create that Sunni Shiite divide. I can't tell you yet when that started, Raymond, but I can tell you that it did not happen in the 7th century. This is something that probably took apart during the Abbasid and during the Ottoman period. Now, you talk about the Fatima, again, made up. Listen, everything you know about Fatima comes from the 11th to the 16th century, so I'm going to come right back to the same problem. And then you get into the problem with embarrassment. I would suggest that what is embarrassing is it's embarrassing to you because you're comparing Muhammad with Jesus. And we have to be careful, because when I talk to Muslims face to face and I bring up some of these problems that you brought up, they just say, well, that's typical. That's normal of any prophet. If he had these proclivities, if he had these problems with his sexuality, if he had these difficulties with demonization, if he wanted to commit suicide, every prophet goes through these crises. But what do? Subvert those prophecies, and they come victorious out of it. That's what they love about Muhammad, is that he did continue in those perversions. He continued, got out of it, and then showed that this is the model for today. And most Muslims come back to me and say, yes, what did Jesus do? What kind of perversions did he get involved in that he was able to subvert and control? because that's what they want prophets to do. And they love Muhammad because he was a leader of men. He was married, he had children, he had multiple wives, and he shut down all of his adversaries. What did Jesus do? He did none of that. I would rather follow Muhammad than Jesus. So most Muslims, when they bring this up out of embarrassment, it's embarrassing to you, it's not to them. When you talk about Alexander, Herodotus, William Wallace, and all these guys, we have so much on them, you say. The problem is we trust them because they fit the right man at the right place, doing the right thing at the right time. When you look at Jesus, he fits the right man at the right place, doing the right thing at the right time. It's when you get to Muhammad, suddenly everything goes out of whack. He comes from a place called Mecca, and you haven't bothered to look at Mecca. There is no Mecca. It's not just on the maps. The maps were Ptolemy from the 2nd century. The reason he didn't write it there because he never went to Arabia. The maps all come from the 16th and 17th era, but don't forget the maps. Just look at the references. Patricia Crone really shuts this down. You need to read her book. She says, look, we can't find any documentary reference for this place. It's in the middle of a desert. Where there's a desert, there's no water, no food, no people, no towns, no promise, no civilization, no history. That's why there is no Mecca there. Now, what she said, and what was very interesting is, look at all the other areas that are around Mecca. So you start from Aden, you go to Najran, to Sana, to Najran, to Taif, you go up to Yathrib, to Khaybar, to Tabuk, all up to Gaza. Look at all those. Those are all just small little hamlets up on the Western Plateau. Every one of them has references. There is reference after reference that goes all the way back to the 3rd century BC. Why can we find no reference to Mecca? So look at the documentary evidence. And then you can see why we're asking this question. Everything you're going to talk about, because he's in the wrong place doing the wrong things, and every one of the people that you're going to say are Muhammad are way up in the north. Why are they up in the north? Because there's water there. Where there's water, there's food. Where there's food, there's civilization. That's why all these people are there. But look at the name that they give this guy. They call him Saracen. They call the people that are following him. He's a Saracen. He's a Hagarin. He's a Maghrayite. He is a Muhajirun. You notice no one is calling him a Muslim. There's no reference to this man or these people called Muslims. When at this time, they should be replete of references to Muslim, especially now that they're controlled and they're dominated by these Arabs. But these Arabs are Nabatean Aramaic from what is primarily Jordan. And that's why they come from the line of Ishmael. They come from Haggai, which is from Hagar. They're also known as the Muhajirun, people who are either on Exodus or from Hagar. In every column, they call themselves Ishmaelites. There's no reference to them being called Muslims until well into the 8th century. That's why we're saying it's the fact that every one of these references, these 30 plus references, put the man too far in the north, put all of these people too far in the north, and they're called them Saracens. Saracens means plunderers. They are plunderers. That's what the word originally meant. They are plunderers from the Sinai.
1 minute.
They dominated both Sinai. They dominated also Jordan. They dominated also Syria, and they dominated Iraq. But they were never down in Mecca. Bingo. Here we come back to Mecca again. In every case, wherever you're going to find this man, the man you're trying to prove, the man you're trying to defend, in every case, I'm going to keep on reminding you, put him in Mecca in the 7th century. I want him down there. You keep on finding and putting a people way up here, and you say it's not important. It's absolutely important. That's why we can follow Jesus Christ, because he's the right man at the right place, doing the right thing at the right time. You cannot say the same for Muhammad. The wrong man at the wrong place, doing the wrong thing at the wrong time.
You still have 19 seconds.
Oh, I think I made my point, because when you look at Jesus and Muhammad, there's the beauty. We can follow Jesus. We know where he did, we know where he lived, and we know what he said.
Okay, thank you very much. Once you say you've done your point, I think that was the stopping point, but thank you very much. Thank you very much for the first rebuttal. It's completed. We will be moving to the second rebuttal. Once again, we've got we've got 1,541 people are watching from both channels. It's really, really important that you tag DCCI Ministries and then tell me who you are asking your question to. Otherwise, I won't be able to see your question, or I won't, it will be missed, and we don't want that. And also, gentle reminder for those of you who are watching in 2 YouTube channels, remember, whether Muhammad exists or not, still Jesus Christ is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and Islam loses in this debate. Keep that in your mind as you are commenting on the speakers. Raymond Ibrahim, your 10 minutes of rebuttal will start when you are ready.
I'm ready.
Okay.
Thank you, Hatun. Thank you, Jay. I have to say, Jay, you are definitely a sophist, and I say that complimentary. That's a compliment, and it must be from many, many years of arguing with Muslims, because you're really good at it, okay? And I can see why a lot of people sort of don't don't catch some of the things that you're doing, and maybe I haven't either. But so I'm going to try to give you some responses. A lot of the things that you say, you speak of them as if they are absolute criteria that are universally accepted, that if this doesn't follow that, no Muhammad. That's not the case, okay? The Mecca issue is not Mecca. What if there's a million what ifs? What if the Muslims got it wrong? What if it had another name? What if all the maps were wrong? Your whole point is it's a conspiracy theory. What if the people who made the maps, it was a conspiracy not to put Mecca? Okay, I understand this is all far-fetched, but this is why I initially said in my first video, and I don't have to know the arguments to know that they are not ironclad, because that's the name of the game when we talk about history. I wasn't trying to be flippant. I was trying to be provocative, but I was trying to make a point, which is that's the way it is with history. You can make any number of argument, but there's always going to be a counterclaim. It could be a ridiculous counterclaim, but it's still there. What do actual scientists say to get by the creation or the design idea that, creation has a designer? They've created the multiverse. Okay. They've said, oh, well, guess what? There's a million all universes and all of them went wrong. So it just so happens one went right. Okay. That's probable. So, okay. This is the sort of realm we're working in here. And we have to be cognizant of that. When you talk, one of the things that I have always noticed when you talk about, okay, like what Mecca doesn't exist, but that's where they place it. And Sahih Bukhari is in Bukhara and he's writing about Mecca. And, but to me, that actually proves it's real. Because if it was a fabrication, why wouldn't they make it a better story? Why would you put it in a place that never existed? Why wouldn't you be, if I was an Umayyad or an Abbasid in Damascus or Baghdad, why wouldn't I trace Muhammad to my lineage and from my town? It's a whole big trick, right? Why would I do this? It's the same thing as I said with Fatima. Why would you trace your lineage through a woman for patriarchal Arabs, if not because that's really what it was, okay? So these arguments, like I said, there's so many answers to them that they are not ironclad, okay? And one can say anything that they want. What you're saying about the Sunni Shias, I'm sorry, but I'm not convinced at all, okay? Because you're talking about much later sources. I already told you the 7th century Christians knew about it. Cebios mentions it. The Maronite Chronicle, they're writing it at the time. They mention Ali. They mention Muawiyah killing Ali. They mention divisions. Okay, so again, this is why I always go back to the 7th century non-Muslim sources, because they are unassailable. These are not part of a conspiracy. They're not too late. And yet they give us what we're looking for. And then you say the Fatima is made up. I mean, I've studied the Fatimas very closely. I've translated texts. They come into being in 909. They trace their descent through Fatima, the daughter of Muhammad. I don't know how you're saying that these all are like made up by the Ottomans and then projected backwards. And then Muslims are so stupid because then they just believe it and start killing each other about some descent that never even happened. And they start hitting their heads with swords on Ashura. It just doesn't make any sense. It's really hard to understand. But of course, you can make arguments. And that's my whole point with history. We can make arguments. Anyone can raise arguments because we're not there. We can't prove it. I can't go bring Muhammad and show him to anyone. And that's why you can accuse everyone of everything. And again, I really need you to answer this question because I think it's very important, which is how do you deal with the Old Testament? You keep telling us that all the Muslim sources are late. Therefore, we have, and you're going by the existent manuscript. You're discounting the fact that we have something from the 14th century, but we realize it's based on an older, now lost scripture or writing or whatever the case may be. If we're talking about the Hadith or the Sirah. You are rejecting that. Okay, that's, again, very, very high standard, very high bar that you're creating. How do you as a Christian then understand the Old Testament? Does this not apply to the Old Testament? How can we be consistent? Or is this just double standards? Are Muslims not going to see through the inconsistency of such arguments? How do you respond to the Old Testament that our oldest manuscripts are 1,000 years after the time of Moses? And then Moses is writing about Adam and Eve, who are thousands of years, or depending on what chronology you want, at least thousands of years. So this is my point. These weaknesses exist everywhere. And, but you're marshaling them and applying them only to Islam and to Muhammad as if there's a unique special weakness to them. But I'm saying there isn't. In context, they're like everything else. And in fact, oftentimes stronger. To me, the 7th century attestations from these guys, that is the gold standard. That is, they're early. They, in broad outlines, discuss Muhammad the way we would understand Muhammad. He's a religious figure. He brings them the law, and he traces himself, and he puts himself in the footsteps of the Old Testament figures, like Cibio says. But at the same time, he comes with swords and chariots, and he claims he's sending people to heaven. Okay, so I understand the Sirah and the Hadith come much later, but they really resonate with what we have from the 7th century. Again, that doesn't mean now you have to accept every single, all the standard Islamic tradition. I don't, okay? But again, the kernel of truth is there. It's evident. But you can say what you want. I don't mean you. Anyone can say anything you want. You give me a historical figure, and if I make it my career, I'll make him disappear because they can't defend themselves, and I can go unearth anything and everything and make every single argument you can imagine to make that guy just go away and disappear. So this is sort of what's happening. You talk about, the word Muslim doesn't appear until much later. Okay, that's not, again, a problem for me. It's a nascent religion. They went by other names, believers, or maybe it was very, very primitive, and whatever word they called themselves. Again, this is what I mean. You take a point, which may be fair, but then you jump to conclusions. Ergo, Muhammad doesn't exist. And that's not necessarily the case. Same thing with Mecca. Whatever the case may be, there may be a mistake. It may be on their side, might be on this side. Maybe Mecca did exist. So again, and I want to emphasize again to people so they understand, we're talking about the 7th century where people do not have our tools. They don't have the internet. They're working under horrible conditions. Mistakes are the name of the game when you come to these chronicles, and this applies to everyone, whether it's in dates or names or places. Okay, but that's not enough to throw the prophet out with the bathwater, at least not for me. And so, yeah, again, I'm gonna ask you, Jay, to answer the Old Testament question, because maybe you know something I don't, and because to me they seem to be analogous. What we're talking about, you're casting doubt about Islam's standard Islamic narrative, and you're saying because the extant manuscripts we have are too recent. They're hundreds of years after Sahih Bukhari and Ibn Ishaq, etc. Okay, so if that's our standard, explain to me, what are we doing with the Old Testament? How do we understand it? I get the New Testament is pretty safe. I get that. But what about the Old Testament? Does this not perfectly apply to the Old Testament? And does that not then, the very same standards that you are raising, cause huge problems for Christians and Jews? How do we get by it? So on the one hand, this again underscores that you can do this to everyone. Okay, we lose early manuscripts, but we have something later. I mentioned Caesar. Everyone assumes what he wrote. Okay, but it's actually 800 years is the most recent copy we have. So, these are, to me, not arguments, or if they are arguments, then we better say goodbye to all of history, because every piece of history is susceptible to these sorts of arguments that are essentially being weaponized for one particular reason. And I guess this is the ultimate point we have to get to. This, in its origin, is a polemic, and I get it, and I have no problem with it. It's a polemic against Islam. And, it should stay that way. But it's sort of spilled over, and I'm going to elaborate this a little more maybe in my closing remarks, and it's almost becoming a polemic against non-Muslims. And what is a polemic? Well, it comes from the Greek word polemos, means war. Okay, it belongs against the Islamic front. I get that. I've on record, I said I don't think it's very strong, but who cares? That's my problem. That's where it belongs. But I often wonder, what are we doing? Not just you and me, but when non-Muslims argue this, what is to be gained by this? Newsflash, I believe Muhammad existed, but he was a false prophet. That means Muslims are deceived. You believe Muhammad didn't exist, so he was a fake prophet, and Muslims are deceived. It's the same exact conclusion, just a very different flavor, a very superficial flavor that we're ultimately arguing about. But it just seems to me that the polemicists who created this against Islam have sort of lost track of it and conflated it, and now they come and argue with non-Muslims, though it's not going to have the same result. If anything, and I'll elaborate this, it actually leads to a lot of confusion and a lot of intellectual disarmament. I'll stop.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. You had 5 more seconds. Dr. J. Smith, your 10 minutes rebuttal will start whenever you are ready.
I'm ready. Okay. Yeah, God bless you for bringing up the Old Testament. This really bothers you because I see, and then a lot of Christians take your attitude. This is not normal. This is not abnormal, Raymond. If I confront Islam, I'm going to destroy the authority for the Old Testament, without realizing we're talking about apples and oranges here. Nobody expects to have the original documents for the Old Testament. No one expects to have Moses's five books. We don't expect that from 1400 BC. We don't expect anything from the Old Testament because there's no manuscripts that could have existed that long. So don't even ask that question. We're not looking for documents. So what do we do with the Old Testament? Listen, when I lived in London, I would take people on the British Museum tour, one of the best museums in the world, by far the best for the Bible. God bless the British. They went all over the world. They stole everything and brought it back to the British Museum so that we could look at our own history. And when you look at the British Museum, there is artifact after artifact after artifact that supports the Assyrian period, that supports the Babylonian period, that supports the Persian period, that goes through all these references, every one of them in the Bible, and says we've got the right man at the right place doing the right thing at the right time. Look at the Amarna tablets that support the whole Joshua account. Look at the Ebla tablets that support, now we know where Sodom and Gomorrah are because of the Ebla tablets that were created in 2300 BC and were destroyed in 2300 BC, a good 400 years before Abraham even lived, and yet support now these great cities that only the Bible talks about. Look at the Mari tablets. Look at the Nuzi tablets that support all the customs from the time of Abraham. So there's an enormous amount of material. Are you not aware of this, Raymond? All the archaeological evidence that we have. Why are you not putting those out? Because you cannot find any other piece of literature except the Bible. And Dr. Gluck says it very clearly. There is not one artifact that has been found anywhere in the world that controverts a properly understood biblical statement. That's beautiful. Only Gluck said this is the only piece of literature that can maintain that. We have so much reference for the Old Testament. We have 50 Old Testament people that we can now identify just because of the artifacts. We don't look for documents because documents wouldn't have lasted that long. So when you're looking at the Old Testament, do not suggest that we have the same problem that Islam has. See, Islam cannot make that excuse because they're only 1400 years ago. We're talking about the 7th century. That's recent history. And I'm asking, where are your documents from 1400 years ago? If we can come up with 24,000 manuscripts for the New Testament alone, if we can come up with 8,500 Greek manuscripts, 10,000 Latin Vulgates, another 19,000 in 11 different languages for our New Testament alone, not all of them are complete. And if we can come up with 86,000 early church fathers quotations that are outside the manuscript evidence, 36,000 that predate the 4th century, that's 300 years before the Quran. If we can come up with such a treasure trove of manuscript evidence for the New Testament, why can't the Muslims do the same when they're 700 years later and they can't find one document, not one document for their Quran, not one document from the 7th century, from the 5 that were made by Uthman and sent to 5 different cities in 652. Not one exists today. That's only 1400 years ago. Why is it Christianity can support the New Testament so much better? Because we wrote it down. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John wrote it down right from the very beginning because they knew that this would be a problem, because God knew that this would be a problem today, because God knew that you would ask that question. God bless you for asking the question. I could go on for an hour showing you how great the Old Testament is, but I'm not going to use documentary evidence. I am for the New Testament because thank God for the early church. They wrote it down, knowing that we do not trust people's oral tradition. I don't trust oral tradition. Look at this debate today. Now ask all these 1,000 people who are watching us right now to write down what we've just said. Listen, you get 1,000 different ways of saying what we just said. I want it written down verbatim. Why did you get so angry with me in your third video on me? Because I didn't quote you word for word. You got really angry with me. Thank God now I'm going to write down everything you say. I'm not going to transfer it because that's what happens to people's memory. If I didn't write everything down you said within just 3 days, can you imagine what happens over 200 years of oral tradition? Now can you understand why Yasser Qadi and Shabir Ali have now said that everybody's looking at us, all the Western scholars are looking at us, and they are finding that everything we're saying about Muhammad and what he did and what he said has been discredited. They have to say that. Because oral tradition is not good enough. You go into a children's playground and you look and see in these parties they have, and they call it telephone or Chinese whispers, what you say to one person and it goes through about 7 or 8 different people. What the next person say, the last person says is 2 different things. If that can be changed in a period of 15 minutes, notice what can be changed in a period of 200 years. But I'm not even saying 200 years. I'm talking about from the 11th to the 16th century. Everything you're dependent on for Muhammad comes from the 11th to the 16th century. That is 400 to 700 to 800 years after Muhammad. Can you then want to understand why I'm asking this question? I have to trust the fact that we use documentation. Now you went on, you talked about the Muwatta. Let me tell you about the Muwatta. You say the Muwatta is great, huh? Here we go. Let me tell you what we know about the Muwatta. There is a partial copy of the Muwatta in Dublin's Chester Beatty Library from the from the 9th century, the late 9th century, from 890s, that's the late 9th century, but it only contains 1/3 of what we use today. The oldest complete manuscript of the Muwatta that you like so much is from 1030. That's the 11th century. But who cares about the Muwatta? The Muwatta is not about Muhammad. It's only about laws and institutions, about laws. It's about what the Sharia law is, which is normal for that time period because they were really interested in what the laws would be for the Muslim community, which was Muslim by that time. I'm not saying it wasn't at that time. So we are looking at the wrong problem. I don't want that's the earliest you can get, and yet it's from the 11th century. Again, woo. Haven't I said 11th century all the way today? 11th. Why is there nothing before the 11th century? That's what I'm asking. Now you go on about, you say that we can trust oral tradition. I hope you realize no one in this room trusts oral tradition. I don't trust it, and I'm surprised you trust it, because I'm mad at me for not trusting your oral tradition of just 2 days or 3 days. And you talk about that Mecca. It's okay. I'm gonna get over that. You talk about why is it the Bukhari? Why would they choose Mecca of all things? There's a good reason why they chose Mecca, but you've not looked at any of my videos, have you? You don't realize we've gone through this. We've done video after video after video, why they had to choose Mecca. To understand Mecca, you have to follow the Black Stone. And don't tell me you don't know about the Black Stone or you don't know the history of the Black Stone. You've got to follow the history of the Black Stone. I don't have time because I only have 3 minutes, so I'm going to get off that. But you need to follow the Black Stone. And what you will realize, if you look at Mecca today, you will see, look at all the traditions of everybody circumambulating 7 times, going counterclockwise. Who did that? The Jews did that in Jerusalem. Why did they do that? Because of Jericho. So everything was up in Jerusalem. Why did they go and run back between Marwa and Safa 7 times, looking for water, tracing that back to Hagar when she was looking for water, and then finally seeing the water where the Zamzam well is today. Now, isn't that rather odd that she's right there in Mecca where there's lots of people living? Why should she be looking for water that close to the Kaaba? There are hundreds of people that are around her. She just knocked on one of the doors. Because that is not the real Marwa and the real Safa. They're just stones 20 feet high. The real Marwa and the real Safa is in Jerusalem. Marwa is Mount Moriah in Arabic, and Safa is Mount Scopus in Arabic. The Jews would go from Mount Moriah down to the Kidron Valley and up to Mount Scopus. That would be a tradition that was carried on, and it's still carried on today. That's why they needed something that was in Jerusalem. Why? Because Jerusalem is the wrong place for the Arabs, and it has too much history, and that's not where the Black Stone is. And I'm just going to say that right now. That's going to take a whole pile. We're going to put it into our book that we're writing on this whole problem here. Now, when you get to the Maronite Chronicles, you talk about Maronite Chronicles. Have you read the original version, or have you read a translation of it by the 2 scholars in 2006 and 2007? Davis, have you read, or Katie? If you look at the original, they mistranslated it over and over again. And this is something that an awful lot of people do today. I even include our good man, Dr. Robert Hoyland. Whenever they come to a reference to Saracen, they put Muslim there. When they come to Hagarin, they put Muslim there. Whenever they come to any of these references, they put Muslim there. To me, that is a travesty. You do not impose your 21st century viewpoint onto a 7th century document. Look and see exactly what the Maronite Chronicles. It says nothing about the Sunni Shiite divide. You are putting that in there, and it says nothing about the Caliph al-Rashidun. That has been imposed by these authors who then mistranslated it. So you cannot say that there is any reference to the Sunni Shiite from the 7th century. I want you to show me in the original script where that's the case, and I leave that up to you. And you ask, why is this polemic important? Remember, polemic is not war, it's war with words. That's what we're doing today. We're not warring against each other. I would be beat up by you. Look at your arms. You're much too strong for me. There's no way I could war against you. But when it comes to war with words, that's exactly what we're doing. And that's what good polemics is. And that's what we're doing. We're doing good polemics. Now, at some point, I want to see whether your polemic is better than my polemic. Because at some point, you really take me on this. I can't do it now because I don't have enough time, but I'm going to show you that actually this polemic is probably the best polemic we have. And in fact, it's probably having more results than you're giving credit to it. But that's for later on, and that may be in my summation. Listen, I don't have too much more, except that I would like to say that in every case when you're going to find this guy named Muhammad, look and see, get the right translation, go back to the original text, go back to the Syriac, and you will see it is not the Muhammad you're looking for.
Okay, thank you very much, Jay. You had 30 more seconds left. Thank you very much. So that was the second part of the rebuttal. So we've closed the rebuttals and we will move to the 8 minutes of closing statements. Those of you who are joining us in the chat, please feel free to bring up your questions and make sure you tag DCCI Ministries and tell me who you are addressing your question. Otherwise, it's going to get missed. That's nothing personal because it's just gonna, chat is moving fast. And also gentle reminder to us all, at the end, Christ is on the throne. He rules and reigns. Islam is loser here. Which side you pick? So those of you who are in the chat, especially, please make sure you remember that you are talking or listening to your brothers in Christ. So, Raymond Ibrahim, your 8 minutes of closing statement will start whenever. Just a second. Whenever you are ready.
I'm ready. Okay. Thank you, Jay and Hatun. I'll close it off by saying what I actually said in my original videos when I made it about this topic, which is, again, we have to understand when it comes to history, this is not a hard science. It's a soft science. More is the pity, and no one laments that more than me. Okay. There's no one, you cannot prove anything, especially when we go back 14 centuries. You can make arguments, and that's what everyone here has heard. You've heard my side of the arguments, you heard Jay's arguments, and in the end, people will just go with what they gravitate with, which actually resonates with them. And oftentimes, it resonates with them for personal reasons as well, okay? But what I've said, when it comes down to it, I've given you the gold standard of existence. Okay, and I'm not going to waste time on it. The 7th century attestations, which are not just, oh, there's a guy in Arabia. No, they're very largely based on what we know from the Muslim tradition, including you have 7th century 600s. They're talking about Ali. Okay, this isn't something that the split between the Sunni and Shias. There's no way you can say it happened much later when we have these old documents. Okay, but again, Jay can make his arguments and it's all legit and it's all fair. That's what it is. This is what revisionism is all about. Okay, but now to me, and I'm going to close by asking, what is the value of this? What is the value of no moery, as I call it? I submit to you that it's very audience specific. Put it this way, there's two people in this whole world and only two. There's Muslims and non-Muslims. And how this specific doctrine impacts both groups is very, very different. Okay. I've already talked a little bit about how I think it doesn't have much impact on Muslims. But having said that, I'm not against it. By all means, Jay or whoever wants to use it as a polemic, I think they should, because that's where it belongs. Okay, this is actually what it's made for, to talk and challenge Muslims about their origins. I have no problem with that. But I've already seen, for example, a recent poll which showed something like, it showed what causes Muslims to leave the religion. And I think the first one was the internal argument, basically about the character of Muhammad, right? And I didn't even see this one. But again, I don't want to be shutting all the doors. It is a polemic, and it has potential to be very powerful. Because if you get a Muslim to believe Muhammad didn't exist, okay, well, that's the end of Islam for that person. But I'm really interested in what it's doing to non-Muslims. It seems to me that everywhere I look, it's actually being brought forward to non-Muslims more than Muslims. I don't mean Jay per se. I know he's debated Muslims a lot. And what is the value of that? Okay, and I'll give you a little anecdote. Very recently, I did a video about the Battle of Yarmouk a couple of days ago. It was its anniversary. And the Battle of Yarmouk is known, a lot of historians call it the most consequential battle in the world. It's supposed to be in 636, and it's the one battle where the Muslims beat the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantines, and then the floodgates open and all of the Christian world starts falling like dominoes, Greater Syria, Egypt, etc. The great Arab conquests are basically traced to the Battle of Yarmouk. I wrote my thesis on it, so I know a bit about it, and I've read the original sources of al-Waqidi, and he's an Arab historian. And as I was making this video, I was talking about it, and I explained what the battle was and how it went, and I gave quotes, and then I showed how what the Muslims said at the Battle of Yarmouk, according to the Islamic sources, informs modern day radicals. So they said things like, we've tasted Roman blood and none is sweeter, and we will break your crosses and rape your women, and and how they took all these soldiers and decapitated them. And I tried to show this is how ISIS and all these other radical Muslims, this is where they get their knowledge from, okay, from that history. And that history has always been accepted by Westerners. In fact, the Battle of Yarmouk was mentioned very, very sparsely, okay, a couple of sentences in these early 7th or 8th century Christian, Greek, Latin, mostly Greek sources. Okay. And, it's a great learning experience. A lot of people are seeing the continuity. Now they've learned something. And then lo and behold, I was waiting it for someone comes crashing in the comments screaming, that never happened. You're using Al-Waqidi. He's a fake source. He's later. Jay Smith said so. And just going off. And I'm wondering to myself, what did this person do? How did this person help non-Muslims? They created confusion. They've basically taken away knowledge that could have been helpful. Like I said, I'm showing continuities. I'm showing how Muslims think. It is understood by most mainstream historians as something that happened, okay? And this is why I made my initial video. This happens now all the time. What are non-Muslims who believe in this doctrine, how are they helping when they fight and argue and create discord and intellectual disarmament among the rest of us? If I believe Muhammad never existed, or put a little further, if every single non-Muslim on the face of this earth believes Muhammad non-existed, how's that going to hurt Islam? It's not going to do anything. In fact, I submit to you, it's going to help Islam hide, because once you believe that Muhammad didn't exist, a lot of things happen in your mind, whether people want to admit it or not. First of all, there's a sense of false assurance, okay? And I think that is one of the reasons a lot of Westerners are gravitating towards this idea. They're basically saying, thank goodness that horrible, horrible man never existed. They want to believe it. It's a validating thing. It makes them feel better. I get it, okay? But that guy was as real as a heart attack, and you do yourself no service to tell yourself that he was a myth. And it's even much worse when you bring it to non-Muslims, and now all you do is confuse them. Here's what happens when you believe, when you go from Muhammad is a fake prophet to Muhammad didn't exist. I believe he's a fake prophet, okay? And there's iterations. It could have been he was demon-possessed, or he just was a liar, or he was an enthusiast. But it all boils down into one thing. Muslims are deceived. They follow a fake teaching, okay? Jay believes Muhammad didn't exist, let's say, okay? What does that boil down to? Muslims are deceived. They follow a fake teaching. It's the same exact thing, so this is not something worth fighting about amongst non-Muslims. It's just creating discord and chaos. When I said it was a polemic, yeah, of course I understand. We're having a war of words, but the war's out there against Islam. It's not amongst non-Muslims, especially because it brings no good. I'm waiting to hear. I hope Jay can tell me, maybe, okay, so it does create intellectual confusion and discord and disarmament, and it creates, false sense of assurance that this thing's going to go away sometime, okay? But maybe all that bad stuff is a sacrifice we have to pay for the good that we gain once we embrace that Muhammad didn't exist. What is that good? I don't understand. Once I believe that, I told you, it's just a slight meaningless shift. It's a flavor. I've gone from he's a fake prophet to from a false prophet to he's a fake prophet. I've gone from he tricked Muslims to some caliph or a king tricked Muslims by creating a fake prophet. It's really the same thing, but I think a lot of people, non-Muslims, have conflated it, and they somehow think that if they believe that, and if they get non-Muslims to believe that, Islam's going to fall apart. It's not. Okay, it's not going to fall apart. It's going to hide. That's all this is doing. It's allowing Islam. Its number one Achilles heel has always been Muhammad, its own history. Okay, I watch Arabic Satellite. I watch Christian polemicists. All they do is talk about Muhammad. They accept him. And they're responsible, Abuna Zakaria Botros, Brother Rashid, they're responsible for millions of people leaving. Again, I'm not attacking. By all means, Jay, use this polemic. But it just belongs there against Muslims. It's not helping our side.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. You still had time.
I do.
Jay Smith, whenever you are ready, your 8 minutes of closing statement will start.
Thanks so much, Raymond. Yeah, this is good. I think we've gone through an awful lot of material. Obviously, we are going to get a lot of questions. People are going to throw questions. We're probably going to unpack even more than what we've been saying at the moment. Now, the question comes down to, and Raymond's done a good job of summating what he believes and concluding what he considers to be a very weak polemic, and possibly even it doesn't really have a place on the shelf for Christianity, and we're just really not really making much sense. I'll get to that. I'll end with that, because I think in some ways this is probably the strongest polemic. But let me end with that. Let me just say this. Today, we ask the question, did the Muhammad of Islam exist? How many of you are convinced now that this Muhammad, who received the Quran, spent 52 years in Mecca, 10 years in Medina. Do you think that Raymond has supported that Muhammad, or has he supported another possible Muhammad? A Muhammad that I would submit is not at all the Muhammad of Islam. In fact, Muslims who are watching, do you agree with his Muhammad? It looks like he needs to find that Muhammad, and he says history is not good enough. We cannot prove anything by history, but yet he's a historian. He proves everything all the time by history. Look at his videos. He does a great job. Look at this book that I've read here. This is a great job of looking at how the defense of the West. That's all historical. So you can't say that history doesn't prove anything. The reason we go to history, the reason we don't want to repeat it, the reason we go back to it and trust it is because it does talk about real truth, about real people doing real things in real places. And if those real people did not do things in those real places, then I chuck them out. I don't want anything to do with them. So that's why we're even asking this question. I didn't want to ask this question. This is not a debate I wanted to do. I really wanted to talk about Mecca and the Quran. Those two are really debatable, much more so than Muhammad, because it's getting visceral, and I'm going to get an awful lot of hate mail, and I'm going to get probably a lot of death threats, because I know a lot of Muslims don't like what I'm saying at all. And the reason is very simple. If the Muhammad did not exist, and if everything they're basing their faith on, and they're only basing their faith, and Raymond is right, their faith has to be come from this man named Muhammad. If Muhammad did not exist, the other two come crashing down. Both Mecca and the Quran come crashing down. In fact, all of Islam comes crashing down. You cannot have Islam without Muhammad. And you can see the dilemma that this is going to be for Muslims. Not for me, not for Raymond, but for Muslims, this is a huge dilemma. That's why they won't let you even question this. Notice, around the Muslim world, there are two things you may not critique. The C-295 law in Pakistan. If you question Muhammad or if you question the Quran, it is a capital offense. Why do you think they have those two laws? Why is it only those two you can't question? Because those are the weakest parts of Islam. Those are the two weakest pillars that hold up Islam. Without even one of them, Islam falls down. And we've been questioning one of those pillars today, which is absolutely dangerous to do so. For me to even make that statement, look what happened to Robert Spencer. For me to even say so publicly, look what happens to anybody. Those Charlie Hebdo cartoons. Look at Hatun. Look at what has happened to Hatun because she questioned him, and she wore those shirts with the cartoons on her. That's something you do not do. You don't touch Muhammad. You don't touch Muhammad, and you can see why. Because without Muhammad, if nothing, Islam is completely flat, goes completely kaput. Now, Raymond, you are right. What's the value in doing this? What's the value? Listen, everything that you do on the internet, and you may do that in Christian circles, but I don't see you doing this in a mosque. I don't see you doing in questioning Muhammad or his fakeness. I don't see you doing that in a public context, because it is very dangerous to do this in a public context, and that's why you only do it on the internet. And I go all over the world. In fact, I'm going to be in 3 different countries in just a month in Africa. And I've been there now 3-4 times. I go back to Africa all the time. And I go to where the Muslims are, and I go to where the church is, and I go to where the church is being persecuted. And in everywhere I go, they say the same thing to me. Jay, we can't use Raymond Ibrahim's material. We can't use Hatun Tash's material. We can't use David Wood's material or Sam Shamoun's material. As good as it is, because if we use that material, we get killed. They come to us with machetes and they kill us. We cannot mock Muhammad, because they see it as a mockery whenever you call him a fake Muslim, a fake Muhammad. They call it as a mockery. But you, Jay, we want you. We want this material. They tell me this. In fact, I'm going to be there in just a little over a month. I'm going to be going because they want this material, because this material doesn't mock Muhammad. This material does not attack Muhammad. We don't even talk about Muhammad. The only thing we say is, prove to me he existed. It takes the onus off my shoulder, and I don't say anything. I don't waste any time about Muhammad, because if he didn't exist, why waste time on him? I don't waste any time opening up the Quran and looking through all the violence or all the misogyny in the Quran. I don't want to. What a waste of time for me. I did that for 35 years. I no longer do that. Why? Because if the Quran didn't exist, what's the purpose? Not in the 7th century in its complete form. So can you understand why you may not like it? And I understand. And as long as the internet, please continue to do that, Raymond. Don't stop doing it. We need you and Hatun, and we need Sam Shamoun, and we need David Woods to continue attacking that Muhammad, because you are right. 99% of the Muslim world believes in that Muhammad, and he must be brought down to to consideration, and we must compare him with Jesus Christ. And in every case, he fails with Jesus Christ. Thank God you keep doing what you're doing. Don't stop doing that. Don't stop doing that. However, I'm not interested in a Muslim on the street. I'm not interested in a Muslim on the internet. I'm interested in the makers and shakers. I'm interested in the Sauls who become Paul. Remember, Saul was an intellect. Saul was an academic. Why did Jesus choose 12 disciples and he had to choose the 13 named Saul? Because he needed an intellect. He needed an academic, because he needed someone to really confront. I have 2 minutes. Okay. He needs someone to confront the whole foundations of what the Jews and the Gentiles were throwing at Christianity. He needs somebody of that caliber. And look and see what happened to Paul once he became Paul. He confronted right, left, and center. He wrote the best theology we have today. And he started church after church after church after church. He got beat up. He got thrown into prison twice. They almost stoned him to death. He caused a riot in Ephesus, and they finally killed him in Rome. That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking at Sauls who become Pauls. I'm looking at the makers and shakers. I want the intellects, the academics. This is an academic argument. You're right. It is an academic argument. I want those to come through, because once we get those through, the rest of Islam's going to follow. Because look and see what Paul has given us. Look and see the legacy he has left behind. That's why this argument, you say, it may be the weakest argument, but it's not on the academic scale. It's not. And even the academics are now realizing that they cannot support their prophet, either what he said or what he did, because it's all been discredited by the very historical critical method that we have supported Jesus Christ. It's because we have had 200 years of supporting what he said and what he did that we know that Jesus Christ did exist. We know he did die on the cross. The only question that is now on everybody's mind is, did he rise from the dead? And we can even support that because of a historical criticism, because of the historical critique. That Islam is just now beginning to be hit with. There's very few of us. That's why you're saying the most popular way of coming to Christ is not through this. It's because no one else is doing it but me and Mel and Robert Spencer and Odin LaFontaine, whose names you don't even know. That's why there's so few of us, but we want everybody to start coming on board, because, folks, you don't have to be killed. I don't get death threats anymore for this, because it is by far the best polemic we have.
Okay, thank you very much, Jay. And that was the officially end of the debate. So we had 20 minutes of opening statements, 2 rounds of 10 minutes of rebuttal, and 8 minutes of closing section. Raymond Ibrahim, thank you very much, as well as Jay Smith, thank you very much. It is good to be reminded again and again that Jesus Christ is the winner. He is on the throne. It's good to see brothers are having discussions and debating these topics. And so right now I've got 96 questions being started. So that means you've got 96 questions to answer, gentlemen. Would you like 5 minutes break before we sit down for the questions? So practical things we are going to do is for the question answer session. I try to take the questions from both channels, so there shouldn't be much problem on that. I ask people to tell me who they are asking their questions to. The person who is answering the question first has 2 minutes to respond to the question, and then the other person has 1 minute to make a response. So both of you are responding to the question, but 2 minutes and 1 minute. Any question?
We're doing 100 questions and they're 3 minutes each.
I think we will stop like in halfway through. I think that's how I am.
Let's put an hour and a half for this. Let's don't go beyond 6:30 if you don't mind.
Okay.
Keep it to an hour and a half.
Okay, let me set up the timing. This is too long.
Is that okay with you, Raymond, if we just go hour and a half?
Yeah, that's pushing it, but I mean, max. I'd like to do it. It's just I have to go somewhere at that point.
Okay, let's put it to an hour then. So let's just say till 6 o'clock, our time, which would be.
Let's go to 6, and if we can stay a little longer, we can check, or if not, we can just.
Okay. So go for an hour on this, and just choose the best questions, Hatun. That while we're speaking, try to get questions that aren't the same.
I can't choose the best questions. There is like 104 questions. So we will start with the super chats first, and the questions comes with that, and then we will go through. What I am starting 1 hour, so should be okay. Okay. This is for Raymond Ibrahim. So also I will put the message on the screen for you to see. So this is not a question, just super chat to Raymond Ibrahim. Would you like me to read it, sir, or you are happy?
Oh,
to
you want me to read it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Igrees. Woo, I love this. Happy to see these individuals together discussing things. Yeah, me too. Thanks.
Thank you very much, sir, for your generosity.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for the super chat. See, some things are moving fast.
Oh, okay.
Hatun, you're getting wealthy, or are these all
Yep.
for his channel?
They are kind of both channels, so we are going to be pretty rich person end of this live stream.
Is there a way to tell which is from my channel, which is yours?
Yeah, so this is to my channel. Previous one was to your channel. I can, when it's your channel, I will verbalize that to you, so you can thank them. Okay. Thank you very much for your super channel. I could make a personal example that Raymond will get instantly, but the only 3 known inscription about the presence of my people in ancient times are Medinat Habu and the Tel Dan and Nora stones. I have no idea what is this about. Raymond Ibrahim, do you have any?
I think there may be some puns in there, but I'm not sure.
Okay, I'll just say thank you.
I hope you didn't. He may have, he or she may have overestimated liability to serve.
Yeah, actually, that's can I do sound check for Raymond Ibrahim? Sound check.
Oh, hello, can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, it's better. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, so first question is to Jay. How would you explain the Sunni Shia split without Muhammad existence? So just give me a second.
Here we go again.
This is the same question we've already done. Can you get one that's not, that we haven't already covered? We've already done this, Hatun.
Wait then.
Try to get a question that has...
Okay, question is for Raymond. If Muhammad was the one being referenced, how then would Raymond explain that this prophet is still talking about Christ to come when he ought to be the last prophet?
I'm not sure what he's referring to. Are you talking about?
That's the doctrine of Jacobi. The doctrine of Jacobi.
The doctrine of Jacobi has Muhammad saying that the Christ is coming.
The Christ yet to come is part of the that's part of the references there. Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's part of the entire thing. I'm just familiar with the main excerpt. So, what is he saying? Maybe you can elaborate.
You've got to read the entire document. It does refer to the Christ yet to come. It talks about the keys of paradise that he
I know about the keys of paradise. I've seen that part. I always thought it was just that one particular excerpt about Abraham and the elderly rabbi. But I do know that amongst the Islamic tradition that Muhammad does talk about the eschatological coming of Christ, and the Dajjal and all that. So there is some room for that. But yeah, I'm not sure. In this context.
Okay.
Yeah, let me answer. This is a problem, and this is one of the reasons why the doctrine of Jacobi has been questioned, because it does refer to the Christ is yet to come, which it goes against chapter 33:40 in the Quran, because it's very clear in chapter 33:40 that Muhammad is the last prophet. So how could he be referring to another prophet yet to come in the future?
But he does. But Islamic tradition teaches that Christ will come on the end days.
Understood. But then how can he also hold the keys to paradise, which comes from Matthew 16:19?
Okay, I just would like to cut right now. So the way we want to do questions is, question came to Raymond. He's got 2 minutes to respond, and then after 1 minute, Jay. So Jay, this is not like having your second debate here. So you want to answer the question? Answer the question. If you don't want to answer the question, we move on.
You're in trouble.
No, I'm just like making sure.
I'm on our killers list almost every day, and I love being on our killers list.
13 seconds left if you want to respond to the question.
Go ahead, Raymond.
Me? Yeah, I do. I do know. We all know that in Islamic tradition there is the end times, and Jesus is supposed to come and break the cross and kill the pigs and cancel jizya. So that is part of the Islamic teaching, and that may very well be some echo of it right there.
Okay.
Okay. Jay, I think you used your time, therefore I'm not going to give you time for this one. Because you jumped in, so we learn from these things. Okay? Sorry about that. Actually, I'm not sure if I'm sorry about it, but like that's the structure I'm going to follow. Okay, question for Jay Smith. Jay, the Quran states, Surah 4, verse 171, that Jesus is the Word of God. Could that not infer that the anti-Trinitarian ruler creating a new religion idea you say to be contradictory? Your 2 minutes start, sir.
That he is the kalimatu, word of God. I'm not sure why that would be contradictory, because certainly Jesus is known as the Word of God. And if it's an anti-Trinitarian in other words, if this is an anti-Trinitarian attack against the Trinitarian, that would still be in the context of a anti-Trinitarian attack. I'm not sure if he's saying that this would be a Trinitarian attack or an anti-Trinitarian attack. I assume he's saying the latter. So the fact that no one's creating a new religion. This is nothing more than a sectarian debate between anti-Trinitarians on one side, headed up by people like Abdul Malik and those who came after, and a Trinitarian debate on this side, headed up by the Byzantines, and who are Trinitarian Byzantine Empire, the two major empires of that time, which would make sense because this is not only a political debate, this is also a theological debate. But it's not that they're starting a new religion. That came much later. It was much more of what you see even today with the Jehovah's Witnesses or who are Arian. Also, the 4th century with the Arianism that's in that time period as well.
Okay, you've done?
Do I still have time?
You still have like 49 seconds.
Sorry. Okay. So, this Anderson, I wish you could define what you mean or what you're saying here, because if this is inferring that this is not an anti-Trinitarian debate, then you're going to have to help me with what's on the Dome of the Rock and what's on the coins by Abdul Malik, which look in every case, look at the inscriptions on the coins that are from 692 to 693. Look at the inscriptions that are from 696. They're all attacking Jesus' divinity. They're in fact attacking the Trinity, and they're attacking his sonship. That's an anti-Trinitarian attack. It's not a new religion. It's very strong Arian kilk, which was quite normal, which was quite understandable. That's been around since the 4th century. It's still around today in the 21st century.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Raymond Ibrahim, you've got 1 minute to respond.
Can we pass?
You can pass.
Okay, I pass.
You want? Okay. Let me bring up next question.
Can I take his minute on that?
No.
Bummer.
Question for Raymond. Why do you claim that in your July 28 video that knowing about the lack of historical evidence supporting the Islamic tradition has a very negative impact on non-Muslims?
I'm not even following. I'm trying to remember what's my July 28th video, and the lack of historical evidence supporting has a very negative impact on non-Muslims. Maybe it's what I was saying, which is those who make the this no-mowery business. In as much as it's a polemic against Islam, I recognize that and I give it its due. I don't understand. It just seems to me that it just causes mischief amongst non-Muslims. Convincing non-Muslims that Muhammad didn't exist does not in any way, shape, or form hurt Islam. Okay, Muslims don't care if we think Muhammad is a fake prophet or a false prophet. We're both disbelievers. We don't believe in Islam. So I do believe that it's safer it's more conducive to an intellectual paradigm to believe Muhammad existed, because that, I think, puts you on safer ground. It makes you take Islam more seriously. It makes you, study his biography. It makes you see things the way Muslims see it, and at least you're on even ground. But if you, in your own mind, say, okay, Muhammad didn't exist, there's going to be a sort of, indifference towards the whole thing, and you're not going to take it too seriously. Why should I bother time studying the seerah and the hadith and whatever? So I do believe
54 seconds.
Yeah, I do believe that when you do adopt this view as a non-Muslim, you invariably create a sort of intellectual disarmament for yourself. And what's worse is then you come crashing out. And that's the only reason I ever spoke about this. The only reason I brought this up is because it wouldn't end. My original opponents, when I would make a video or an article or a book or whatever, emails and comments, were Muslim apologists, dumb leftists. And now it seems the majority are the nomos, who come and argue and fight. And I'm wondering, what are you helping? How does this help anyone? You're not helping our side. If you make me not believe in Muhammad, okay, now what? I just gone from false prophet to fake prophet. Muslims are deluded either way. So that's why I think it's a weakening of the non-Muslims when we push this no-mowery business.
Thank you very much, sir. Jay Smith, you've got 1 minute if you would like to respond.
This is a great question, actually. This is brilliant, because the no-mowers, as I claim to be one, when you look at, you say that there are no mowers, what you're doing is you're doing the same thing that happened in the 1800s when people like Wellhausen and those in Tübingen asked the same question of Jesus Christ. And look what the damage it did to the church in Europe, especially in Western Europe. So that today, only about 5 to 7% of the people go to church, mainly because of historical criticism and Darwinianism. The same thing can happen with Islam, and that's why I'm really excited that we can demand the same thing that was demanded of us in the 1800s, we're now demanding in the 21st century. And what's going to happen to the Muslims if there is no Muhammad? Who do you think they're going to turn to? There's only one place to turn to but us. They're going to have to come home, Raymond. That's why, listen, if there is no Muhammad, forget about Muhammad. Why don't you come on home to Jesus Christ? What a better prophet, not an embarrassing one at all. And he can answer your needs and he can save you for eternity. Come on home.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Next question is for Jay.
For me, or is it supposed to be for him now?
No, that's for you. You've got 2 minutes to respond to this question.
Gotcha, go.
Okay, the question is, if the hadith are unreliable, why would Islamic leaders allow people to just make stuff up about Muhammad? Your 2 minutes start, sir.
Okay, this is great. Why do you make up anything? Why are there legends? Why are legends exist? Why do we have a legend of Arthur? Why do we have a legend of Robin Hood? There are so many legends that exist that make up, because sometimes it's entertainment. In this case, it's to create the identity for the Nabateans, for the Ishmaelites, for the Hagarians. They didn't have what their greatest competitors were. Remember, the Ishmaelites didn't have a prophetic line, nor did they have a revelation. The Jews and the Christians do have a prophetic line, and they also have revelations. So the Ishmaelites, who now control this whole land from all the way from Spain over here in the west, all the way to India into the east, from Turkey in the north, all the way down to Yemen in the south, the second largest super civilization of its time, and they also control the holy places. Yet they have nothing that they can handle on. They don't have anybody through Ishmael. So what do? As first of all, you confront the person that the Byzantines are your greatest threat. You confront him, right? And you confront their prophet, and then you introduce your own prophet. But once you introduce your own prophet, you got to have a book. Can you see why a book had to be hurriedly put together? That's why Stephen Shoemaker says that this idea of putting a book together probably happened during the time of Abd al-Malik and al-Hajjaj. We have lots of references to that. That's why it's all over the place. Ulta, pulta, pulta. Once you have a prophet, once you have a book, you got him referenced, and you got him there by the early 8th century, then you've got to give him a backstory. That's why all these traditions had to be written, but they had to be accreted and deleted and corrupted and changed for another 400 to 700 years as they were putting it together into what the prophets did and what the prophet's saying today. But it did not happen in 22 years like Muslims like to suggest. It happened over 400 to 600, possibly even 700 years. That makes sense. And that's why now Muslims have a person, a book, and a place.
Thank you very much, sir. Raymond Ibrahim, 1 minute to respond if you like.
Yeah, if the hadith are unreliable, why would Islamic leaders allow people to just make stuff about Muhammad? Well, I suppose they wouldn't. If in fact the hadith were a tool by some nefarious Arabian king or whatever the case may be who wants to create a hagiographical prophet, they would have been very much under control and very much so. Again, this is why I say a lot of the things that people would raise questions about that look messy, for example, the Quran and how it's so messy and it's it's not chronological and it's put in length order. To me, these always are reflective of authenticity, because if there is a mind behind this, which is carefully sitting, some cabal of these learned whatever leaders sitting together and scribes and writers, they could have created a much better fabrication. Both the hadith, both the Quran. The reason that there are questions to me is because this is a reflection of something very natural.
Thank you very much, sir. Your time is up. This is for you, Raymond.
Thornbird, congrats for this debate. Long waited for. Thank you. Glad you liked it.
And also thank you very much for him. Okay, so next question is for Raymond.
Raymond Ibrahim, what about the Chinese connection? The first Arab envoy went to the Tang court in 651. They did not mention Muhammad, Islam, a prophet, or the Quran. Chinese kept detailed records. Okay, so on the one hand, this is good. It shows you Chinese, Arabs. Again, here's an assumption. The assumption is, if he exists, I expect full detailed records, and everything has to be there. Like when Jay says, you have to account for every single last surah, you have to account for Mecca, you have to account. These are made up criteria that you've made up. They are not essential to prove that the guy existed, and in varying degrees, it's a nascent kind of development. Okay. So if anything, I'm familiar with what you're talking about. I believe it's in Hoyland, the Chinese connection. But okay, 651, they didn't mention Muhammad, but we have records from 660 from Sibios who does mention Muhammad by name. So this doesn't prove anything. People write things the way they want to write it, and they highlight the things that they think are important. Apparently this one didn't think that name was important. Sibios does. John of Damascus does. Abu Qura, Theodore Abu Qura does. Okay, and they're all from around that rough time frame. So that really doesn't tell me anything other than these are writers who are picking and choosing, and also limited. Maybe the person with this Chinese connection wasn't aware. They didn't hear about Muhammad. Again, people, it's just this idea that, you know, for Muhammad to exist, everything about the standard Islamic narrative has to be there from day one, spelled out perfectly. That's not history. That's not how things are. It's a mess. It's a mess. History, if you've spent time looking at chronicles from this time and even later, it's a big mess. And what historians do is try to piece it together. But if you have a polemic involved, well, okay, now you can exploit this mess and say, aha, the guy doesn't exist, which, as I said, I'm fine with that as long as it's directed at the correct target. That is to say, Muslims, and not being spilling over with non-Muslims, where if you change their mind, nothing changes, but you do create a lot of confusion and discord.
Thank you very much, sir. Your time is up. Jay Smith?
Yeah, I think Raymond's missed the point on this question, and that's fine. What the guy is saying is, why is it someone from way over in China gets it right and doesn't realize that that doesn't even mention anybody from called Muslims or from Muhammad? But if you can continue with the Chinese, they do refer to it in the mid-8th century, and they even call him Momino. So they actually refer to him in a Chinese derivative of Muhammad, and that this is the people, this is the prophet. But that's 100 years later. What's more, the reason they brought up this paradox, I think, brought up this question is because the Chinese would not have been under the jurisdiction of the Umayyads or the Abbasids or the Ottomans, who then took, that's why you can't find any documents about this man or this place or these people that early, because they have been derived, they have been changed and accreted and deleted and corrupted and finally put together after the 11th century. You can't do that with the Chinese. So you've got to say the Chinese have a much better record of what was happening because of the fact that they are distant and not under the authority of the Umayyads or the Abbasids.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. This is for you, Raymond Ibrahim.
Normal is overrated. Great debate, very informative from both sides of the topic. However, I think the clear loser of this debate is Islam. Without lies, Islam dies. Okay, I think we can all agree to that. And again, I emphasize the point that if you're a non-Muslim, the default status, the default position that you are in is that Islam is built on a lie. That's why you're a non-Muslim. You don't accept the dawah, the Islamic gospel, if you will. Now, how you don't accept it, historically and traditionally, it was, okay, yeah, Muhammad exists, but I don't believe his prophecy. Okay, he lied. He was demon possessed. He was an enthusiast. Whatever the case may be, these were the traditional understandings amongst especially Christians. Now we have a new one. He didn't exist. On the one hand, it seems so revolutionary, but it's only revolutionary when Muslims accept it. Because of course, if you're a Muslim and you're confronted with two things, Muhammad is real, but he's immoral, whatever. Yeah, you can rationalize it. But if you're confronted with Muhammad never existed, okay, you've pulled the plug on Islam. Okay, so that is powerful in that sense. But to non-Muslims, when you accept that Muhammad didn't exist, I think it's a conflation. People, non-Muslims, think that because it's also egotistical, I think, and kind of egocentric, because it's kind of like, oh, I'm convinced Muhammad didn't exist, so somehow this is going to spill over, and now Muslims are going to believe he didn't exist, and it's not the case.
Thank you. I just wanted you to say thank you.
Do I get a 1 minute rebuttal?
No, this wasn't question. There's no question.
Let me just say 2 words. I get 2 words. Thank you, Raymond. We agree on something.
Yeah.
Okay. That was just like for Raymond to say thank you to his.
Okay.
Okay, that's fine. Okay. Now next question is for Jay. Jay Smith, what kind of Muhammad you are looking for?
Oh, I think this was quite normal. I said, how many times I say? In fact, can I waste another 2 minutes just going, what kind of Muhammad? I'm looking for Muhammad of Islam. That's what the title of the debate was. And, for Muslims who are listening to this debate, they must be, it must be tragic on both sides, because both Raymond and I are really coming to the same conclusion that even the Muhammad that they want, the Muhammad that they have to have, which is the Muhammad of Islam, which received a Quran, all 114 surahs, lived in a place called Mecca, and was there for 52 years, and did all of this before 632 when he died. This Muhammad, both Raymond and I realized just you cannot support. You can support all kinds of references to Muhammad. Raymond really likes Sabaeus. He went on, I think twice now he's talked about Sabaeus. He didn't read the rest of Sabaeus. Did you read what else Sabaeus says about this? He said that he went with 1,500 12,000 Israelites. They divided amongst their tribes 12,000 Israelites attacking the Byzantines in the 7th century. Is there any historical record of Arabs or Muslims, in this case, as you were claiming, with the Jews invading Byzantium in the 7th century? 12,000 of them. There's no historical record. So if you're going to use Sabaeus, you're going to have to answer that part of Sabaeus. You're not willing to do that. You're willing to say, I like Sabaeus because he does refer to a word Muhammad, but he doesn't. But you don't like what else he says. And I think this is why I'm stipulating to Samuel, be careful of which Muhammad you're looking for. You can find all kinds of Muhammads, and you can find all kinds of fake stories about him, and you can find that pretty much the Muhammad that Raymond has put today is a man with a sword who is a plunderer and is way up in the north, but he's not where he should be. I want that Muhammad. I want your Muhammad, Muslims. I can't find your Muhammad, and neither can Raymond. But he will certainly do justice to the other Muhammads, many of whom are in the wrong place, doing the wrong thing at the wrong time.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Raymond, you've got 1 minute.
Yeah. So Jay once again presupposes that for a historical source to be useful, it has to be 100% accurate. In which case, if we apply that standard across the board, no historical source will ever be accurate, and everyone disappears from history. So, the 12,000 Jews and so forth. In fact, there's an echo of that. That's kind of true. Maybe that's not in other sources. We do know in Medina that he was very much allied with the Jews. We know before Medina, before Islam, the Persians and the Jews were very much allied in their attack on Jerusalem. I think it was in 612 or 615. So if anything, there is some sort of accord in that sense. Maybe CBOS knows something we don't know. Maybe he has access to something we've lost. I think the fundamental thing with me is I trust these guys more because they were there, whereas Jay and I are here 14 centuries later conjecturing.
Thank you very much, sir. Question for Raymond Ibrahim.
Why dismiss Ptolemy? He lists tiny villages in Arabia Deserta, yet omits Mecca, only first noted in 741 AD. Doesn't this omission cast doubt on Muhammad's existence and origins? Well, from what I understand, though, Ptolemy's map was made before Mecca, according to the Muslim tradition, came into being, which I want to say 3rd, 4th century, or 5th century even, maybe 4th century. Okay, Jay will correct me when it's his turn. But the bottom line, but also these tiny villages in Arabia, a lot of people say don't exist. Okay, or they could have been a tribe or a reference. Again, it's just interesting how on the one hand, we dismiss the sources I'm talking about, but then we go to Ptolemy and say, oh, this guy's omniscient. This is a Google map and it's perfect. And it's just everything is where it has to be. And if it's not, then therefore there's no Mecca and there's no Muhammad. Okay, I hope people see the extreme sorts of jumps we're making here and assumptions. All right, it could be Ptolemy's wrong. The guy's not immaculate. He's not perfect. He's not omniscient. It could be, believe it or not. It could be, since our whole debate is essentially based on a conspiracy theory. This is Jay's position, right? Muhammad is based on a conspiracy theory by these Abbasids or Umayyads or whoever. Well, maybe it was Ptolemy who had a conspiracy. Maybe Mecca was really important. He didn't want to give it its due. You see, when you open speculation, we can say anything and everything. And but some people, and if you're a clever sophist like Jay, you'll present these arguments as if they're ironclad and this is the criteria, this is what we all must agree to. But we don't. Okay, the whole Mecca thing does not in any way, shape, or form faze me. It could be so many things, but that does not mean Muhammad did not exist. It does not mean that the official narrative, more or less, is wrong. That is a jump. That you're jumping from a premise to a conclusion, and it's a false connection.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. J. Smith, 1 minute.
Yeah, obviously Raymond has not read the Quran and he's not read the traditions, because that's not the claims Muslims make. No Muslim would ever accept what you've just said. Mecca did not begin to exist in the 4th and 5th century. In the Quran, in chapter 7, look, chapter 7, verse 24, Adam and Eve are thrown out of the Garden of Eden, up in space, down to, according to traditions, down to Mecca. So it's the oldest city in the history of mankind. There is nothing earlier than Adam and Eve. If you look at chapter 21 of the Quran, Abraham is there rebuilding the Kaaba in 1900 BC. So it's a very important city. If you look at all the traditions, it's the center of all trade, north, south, east, or west. Why is it that no one has heard of this place? Yet it's supposed to be the oldest city in history, one of the greatest historical cities, and certainly the center of trade by the 7th century for the whole world. And yet you're saying it only begin to exist in the 5th century. You've got to say, show what Muslims are saying, what their traditions are saying. That's why we're confronting Mecca. Where is it? Any reference to it? Not one.
Your time is up. Thank you very much, sir. Raymond Ibrahim, this is for you, and it's not a question.
Just because it was an interesting debate to watch. Thank you all. Hopefully we'll see more. Thank you.
And this is for you again, Raymond.
Raymond was saying that we should brush off the map and the datation issues. Don't you think that mistakes have consequences?
Is that a question, or is that a...
That's a question through Super Chat, or comment through Super Chat to Raymond Ibrahim.
Okay. So do I answer or what?
Yes.
Okay, I don't see a time thing. That's why I'm asking.
Oh, sorry, apologize. Sorry.
Okay.
Yes.
So Raymond was saying that we should brush off the map and the datation issues. Don't you think that mistakes have consequences? Yes, mistakes have consequences. I'm trying to tie that to your first point. And what I'm saying is the map could have a mistake. Okay, do people understand Ptolemy's map when it's being made, the conditions it's being made under? Forget about Ptolemy's map. Have you ever seen the maps that, before the New World, and just how completely wrong they are? And even the maps of the Old World, Europe, and Jerusalem's in the center, there's a lot of cities that are not there, but they've existed. I've seen a lot of old maps that don't have Alexandria because they're made in Europe, and Alexandria is not a big issue for them, even though Alexandria goes. So my point is, I'm not saying this is a bad argument. This is a fair, legitimate thing that should be investigated. But it is not, this isn't the conclusive proof Muhammad didn't exist. It's an argument. It could be a mistake. There is so many responses to this. Just like Jay responds to the ironclad evidence of the 7th century testimonials of non-Muslims of a guy named Muhammad, despite what transliteration they used. Okay, he can do that. That's his prerogative. He can just say, oh yeah, that's not right, it's wrong, forget about it. Okay, well, I'm not obligated to have to prove to you every single thing about the Mecca map. It could be wrong. It could be a conspiracy. Why not? We've already, the whole idea of no Maori is it's a conspiracy. Couldn't maybe Ptolemy had an issue. He didn't want everyone to know how important Mecca really was. Okay, you see my point? And I'm not saying I believe that. I'm just trying to show you, once you open the gates to conjecturing, it's no holds barred. You can say anything against anything and everyone. And this is sort of what's going on here.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Jay, 1 minute, please.
Yeah, you're really caught into the maps. Forget about the maps, okay? The maps are damaging. Why don't you go back to what Patricia Crone said in Meccan Trade and the Rise of Islam in 1987? Now, this woman reads and writes 15 languages, which you and I cannot do. So she went back to all the original documents. She wanted to find any reference to Mecca. She went to the Assyrians. She couldn't find any reference. She went to the Babylonians. She went to the Romans. She went to the Persians. Couldn't find any reference from any of those civilizations. Remember, she reads all of their languages. So then she decided, well, let's look at people that were closer. So she went to the Nabateans up in the north. Couldn't find any reference to Mecca. She went to the Nubians over in the west. Couldn't find any reference. She went to the Himyarites in the south. All these are surrounding Mecca and couldn't find any reference to any of these from the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, all the way up to the 8th century. That says something right there. If you can't find any reference to this city, and yet you can find all kinds of references to Sana and to Najran and to Yathrib and Taif and Khaybar and Tabuk and all these other insignificant towns.
Up, sir.
That's a problem, and that's why you have to answer that one.
Thank you very much, Jay.
Can I respond to that or no?
No, you lost your chance.
Okay.
Let's hear a response. I'd like to hear his response to that.
Like, it will change the structure. If I give him, like, it's
Just
going to
give me
go
a
back.
minute.
Okay, Jay, you're okay with that?
I'm fine, yeah.
1 minute. Don't cut him off, please. Yes, sir.
And okay, so man, I just lost it right now. So the Mecca, I was gonna say something was on the tip of my tongue, and I'm getting senile.
You can't. Only I can get senile. I'm a lot older than you.
No, it's I have a premature senility going on here, but I was gonna say something really important, but if it comes back to me, and if we have time, I'll let you know.
Okay, sorry about that. I just didn't want to change the structure.
That's fine.
This question is for Jay through Raymond Ibrahim's channel. Thank you very much for your generosity on behalf of Raymond. Question is for Jay. It was said that Muhammad was warlord, and are there not sources for the Battle of Kaaba and other battles to verify his existence?
Great question. This is another one that's going to come back and to haunt them, because we're now looking at those battles and we cannot find references to those battles for one very good reason. There's nothing down that far south. The ones way up in Khaybar, look at the ones in Khaybar. We don't have any reference from any Jewish sources because the people that he's attacking are Jews. So look at the Jewish reference. There's no reference to any battle from Khaybar in the Jewish sources. So we can't find any, and that's why this is something we're just beginning to get our hands onto, and why we're now looking at. In fact, that's something that's in situ. We're doing that as we speak, because we need to see, listen, let's unpack a little bit more. Let's go to the next rung of circles, and let's look and see all these 33 battles that Muhammad supposedly either was participated in or actually planned for. Where are these 33 battles? See if we can find references to any of them, and let's see if we can find the people who were being attacked. Let's take it from their perspective. Many of them were Jews. Certainly, some of them were Christians if they're further up north. What is most interesting is the historians can't find any reference of Christians and Jews further down than Tabuk, which is way up in the Gulf of Aqaba. There is no historical reference to these Jews anywhere in Khaybar or from Taif or in Yathrib. That's right there is going to be a problem for those people who are looking for battles. But more than that, if you're looking for battles, don't just start with battle. Look at the people's names and look at all these references to Fatima and Ali. You brought up Ali earlier. Actually, there's quite a few references to Ali, but he lived way up in Hira, in what is today Iraq, way too far to the east and not way down in the south. So you've got there. It's obviously another Ali, but he was a king. He didn't call himself a caliph. He called himself an emir. In fact, that word caliph wasn't used that early. So all of these have the wrong people and the wrong battles in the wrong places at the wrong times. Again, just making my point even more clear.
Thank you very much, sir. Raymond Ibrahim, you've got a minute to respond.
Can I use my minute to respond to the Mecca thing? I remembered.
I'll give you 2 minutes. And
Give him 2 minutes. One for Mecca and one for this.
Yeah, I'm gonna give.
All right. I'm mostly interested in the Mecca at this point, but so Jay's point was that there is no attestation for Mecca. Okay, as he was talking about Patricia Crona and everything she's done and shown, et cetera, et cetera. But doesn't that raise the question? Why would these guys who are fabricating Muhammad create Mecca? Wouldn't the people living at the time of this very first generation where Muhammad is being fabricated realize there is no Mecca? Okay. I mean, this is what I mean, that the fact that there are question marks actually validates that this is authentic. Why would they do that? If there's no Mecca, as has been delineated right now, then why would I, if I'm fabricating a story, create a fake? Wouldn't I realize that people are going to have question marks and be like, where did this Mecca come from? This is what I mean by when I say, Fatima. Why would they trace it through a woman, a matriarchal line, which is not patriarchal like Arabs and so forth. All right, I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you very much. Did you wanna comment on this question, or Jay?
Yeah,
you are not.
No.
You are not commenting on it, Jay. You already commented on Mecca. He responded what you said, and then you already commented question on the screen. And Raymond Ibrahim if he wants to comment on this for 1 minute, I'll give him 1 minute to comment on it.
Yeah, I'll be quick. It was said that Muhammad was a warlord. Yes, are there not sources for the Battle of Khaybar and other? Yes, and they're non-Muslim sources. I believe the Maronite Chronicle actually mentions the Battle of Khaybar, which is the whole point of the Shias and the Sunnis. And this is the thing, you can attack the standard Islamic tradition all you want, but the fact is, we have the early tradition of the Christians, which in broad outlines validates what we're talking about. Okay, they're talking about Ahl al-Bayt, the people, the family of Muhammad. If he doesn't exist, he has no family, he has no descendants, and these guys are killing each other till this day based on that. And we have the early, claims and attestations coming from the Fatimid. I already mentioned that. So, yes, the Battle of Khaybar is there. Not just, if you want it, you can ignore the Muslim sources all you want, but they're actually attested to in early contemporary Christian sources.
Okay, thank you very much, sir.
Can I respond to that?
No, Jay, there was nothing for you to respond. You already had your 2 minutes to make your points,
Okay.
and then you made it, okay? And thank you very much for your generosity here. And the next question, I'll give 1 minute to both of you because this is coming through super chat and it's not being addressed to his question is being asked. Who did more to spread Islam, Turks or Arabs?
Go ahead, Raymond.
So the Arabs actually, well, yeah, they spread more of Islam, believe it or not, because most of the nations they conquered were Christian. All these countries from Syria, Greater Syria, which encompasses all of the Middle East, Jordan, or most of Iraq, Israel, Lebanon, and Egypt, and Libya, and Tunisia, and Algeria, and Morocco, and even Spain temporarily. These were the Arabs, or the Saracens, the Saracanos, right? The Turks come later, and they definitely do spearhead the jihad. They conquer primarily, mostly Asia Minor, the whole of it, and then they go into the Balkans much later in the 14th, 15th century, 16th, and they conquer a lot of the Balkans. And but the Arabs, I would say, are more important in the sense that they also applied their language and their culture. They Arabized basically what we call the Arab world. So one nation was Arabic, Arabia, but now there's 22 because they've been Arabized.
Thank you very much, sir. Jay, you've got 1 minute.
No, I'm not going to say too much more than what Raymond said. And listen, I'm going to just defer to Raymond because this is his area of expertise. He's much more knowledgeable in what comes after the origins. And that's why I've really appreciated his channel. And I would suggest people go listen to what he's saying. On this area, he is brilliant. On the origins area, I'm not so sure. But certainly on this area, listen to what he's saying. Because if you're going to say that the Muslims are the ones who did more, the Turks or the Arabs, and you're saying by Arabs, Muslims, I would say no. These are Saracens, and that gets back to the Maronite thing that you were talking about a little earlier. If you look read the rest of the Maronite, and you will see that it is not Muslims that are doing this. These are Saracens again. These are plunderers in Khaybar. Therefore, the Maronites do support the fact that they were plunderers down there, but not that they were Muslims who were doing this. Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jay, for the question that you were not going to answer much. You already spent almost 40 seconds on it. Actually, 50 seconds. Okay, this is question for Raymond Ibrahim.
Let me ask you, 100,000, is that 100,000 IDRs? Is that dollars?
I don't.
Is that Indonesian dollars?
I don't know.
You're rich.
Okay, thank you, Kontala Suwata. Quran, Kufic language, created 8th century. How is it possible that a story claimed to be from the 6th century, but its language was only created in the 8th century? I find that very easy. As I already mentioned, so many societies, including today, are oral societies. Their whole tradition is memorized and bequeathed orally, and then much later it gets recorded. And this is even in Europe. It's Ireland. So much of it was like that. The Greeks, the Iliad, the Homeric, the Iliad and the Odyssey. These were all believed to be oral for centuries. Now you can say, hey, oral stuff gets lost. And that's fine by me, but you know what? Written stuff can also be wrong, and I think the oral tradition gets attacked unfairly because we don't understand it because we're not an oral society. We're a data society. We record and we write, and that's great and that's fine. Okay, and that's why we have a weak understanding of how powerful oral societies were. Doesn't mean they didn't make mistakes. We, with our written records, make mistakes. I'm sure they did too. But there's this idea that if it's an oral society, it's all wrong. Forget it. No, I don't want to hear it. And I disagree with that. Okay, and it's not just the Arabs. And the Arabs were actually amongst the more. They're well known for they're very much into poetry and qasidas, and until this very day, and they make it rhyme in a certain way to memorize it. So for me to say that something is based on an oral tradition, one, I'm not surprised by that, because almost everything is based on oral tradition. This is not an Arab or Islamic specific argument. And two, it seems weak because we don't have it anymore, and we don't have that mnemonic memory anymore. But I believe it was very strong for those peoples, and it is still strong for tribal Aborigine peoples till this day.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Jay Smith, your 1 minute starts.
Yeah, I think what Controla Soato is really asking here is, how can the Quran, if the Quran is basically in a Kufic script, it's not really Soato, it's also in the Hijazi script as well, which predates the Kufic script. But what she's asking is, are you suggesting the claims that Muslims make is the Quran was complete by 652, sent to 5 different cities, and how is it that we can't find any of those Qurans at all in the from that century? And if this was all based on oral tradition, as you're claiming, why is it that the standard Islamic narrative says just the opposite? It was written by Zayd ibn Thabit. He is a scribe of Muhammad, and that these 5 copies were there by 652. So there is no oral tradition on this. So it's a non sequitur to talk about oral tradition and how great it is. The fact that it was a written text by 652, and 5 of them went to 5 cities, of which not one exists today. That's the problem.
Okay, thank you very much, Jay. Brother Hussein, thank you very much for your generosity. Jason, thank you very much for your generosity and for your prayers. Question for Jay.
How do you? You want me to read it?
You can read it. I'll press the time after you finish the question.
How do you explain the amazing something of North Africa leaving their local pagan religions in the 7th to 8th century if Muhammad Islam did not exist? Very simply. Of course they did, because look at the 8th and 9th century, but we don't have any of them coming. They're not leaving North Africa. They're not leaving their religion. We don't have references to them leaving and becoming Muslims that early. They all become Muslims in the 8th and 9th century. That we have lots of reference for. And we have lots of references to Saracen and Arabs who are plundering right across North Africa. That we have references for. What we're asking and saying is, show me that these were Muslims. Show me that these were led by a man named Muhammad. Show me that name to Muhammad on their lips. In the 8th century, yes. And the 9th century, yes. But not in the 7th century. That's all we're saying. So that's why we're being very careful about what we do claim. I don't claim that by the 8th century there was not a Muhammad. There was Muhammad by the 8th century. I don't claim also that there were no Muslims. It looks like on the inscriptions, the first reference we have to Muslims, Ilke Linkstedt, who's done his doctoral thesis on this, shows that even on the inscriptions, they don't begin to appear until about 730. That's well into the 8th century. We know that John of Damascus refers to the Mahbet in 730 as well, and also we do have Muslims being referred to by John Niku, although that one, I would be careful, is actually from a 15th century manuscript. So by the 8th century, that's not a problem. In the 7th century, if you can show me, Suleiman, that there is somebody called Muhammad, that people are going in the name of Muhammad, going across North Africa as Muslims, and not just Saracens or Arab plunderers, which they did all over that part of the world, not just North Africa. They also went up to Syria. They went all right across Jordan. They went all the way over into Iraq. They're well known, and that's who these people are writing about. The Jews and the Christians were being hammered by them, and so certainly there is reference after reference after reference to these Saracens, but not Muslims. They were called Hagarenes, they were called Muhagarites, they were called Muhajiruns, and they were called Saracens. Those are the 5 names they were called, but they were not called Muslims.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Raymond Ibrahim, this super chat comes through your channel as well. Sorry, I forgot to mention that earlier.
Okay, yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, it's a good question, and I'll tell you what I know about the Amazigh, or as they're known as the Berbers. In the 7th century, according to the Islamic text, there's wars with the Amazigh, and there's the Kahina, who's like the priestess or the leader of the Berbers, as they're known now. And what's funny is the Islamic texts can always make this point. They say they fought very fiercely, and then they would give in and they would say the Shahada. There is no Allah, but there's no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. And then once the Muslims left, they would renege and go back to their non-Muslim ways. So I think that's an interesting, tidbit that's recorded in the Islamic histories. I have it in one of my books if you want the sources. It's Sordid Scimitar, chapter 1, but I can't remember it right now. But it's an early Arabic Muslim source, and it's interesting because they make the point that they converted for opportunistic reasons, and then they would leave because they knew that's what the Arabs wanted.
Your time is up. Thank you very much. This is through Raymond's YouTube channel. This is a follow-up of the first question we took, which we couldn't make sense of it. So this is like
okay, yeah,
follow-up of that question.
All right, the new Bronze Age collapse. You didn't get my previous example, laughing emoji. So I'll make another one. If the existence of Mani, the Persian prophet, is taken as attested based solely on Manichaean tests, why are the hadith deemed as unreliable instead? Well, because I already pointed out, because there's a concerted polemical effort to take Muhammad down, just like there was a concerted polemical effort to take Jesus down. Mani is not that important. Caesar's not important. Alexander the Great's not important. The Vikings that are recorded in Snorri Sturluson's saga are not important. It seems that these polemics against religious figures seem powerful because we think that everyone's free game, and if anyone seems to be not well attested, then historians are going to come out and prove they didn't exist. They don't. Nobody cares. They only care about people who matter today, and they are religious figures, Jesus and Muhammad. So that's why someone like Mani, he is a religious figure, I get that, but Zoroastrianism is, it's a very, very small demographic right now. That it's not something that I don't think there's a reason for people to try to take it out, but there is a reason to try to take out the foundation of a religion, Islam. 2 billion people, I believe, at this point, which is creating problems amongst the world. That's why Mani gets a free pass, Muhammad doesn't. It's just quite that simple. And it goes back to the point that I was trying to make, which is all the arguments you're hearing sound compelling because you don't know the truth about history, which is that it's so tenuous, it's so fragile, so much of it, if someone puts it under the microscope, whoever it is, I don't care who it is, if there's someone not very modern, someone from 1000 AD and before, all these questions can arise. But they seem compelling about Muhammad because no one does it for these other guys, including Mani, because they just don't matter. But Muhammad does matter. Jesus matters. That's why these polemics exist in the first place.
Thank you very much, sir. Jay, you've got 1 minute.
Yeah, I agree with Raymond. There's a huge difference between Mani and Muhammad. Mani, as Raymond said, is not really that consequential. Muhammad is hugely consequential because of what he did, especially to those who stood against him, especially to those who confronted him. When he has people killed and assassinated, when you have reference after reference, over 140 references that are supposedly coming from this man that's saying to slay the believer wherever you find them, besiege them, lay in wait with them, all kinds of ambush. In chapter 9, verse 5 of the Quran, when you have in chapter 47, verse 4, cut off the heads of the unbeliever. There's verse after verse after verse that came from this man, and he did exactly that. When you have that kind of example, you want to confront him, but you want to use the same criteria that they confronted Jesus Christ with. That's all we're demanding. So historical criticism starts with the same premise. You've got to find the man, at least he's referred to. If you can shut him down and throw him out and say he never existed, then all those references and all those scriptures that are such terrible and being practiced by so many Muslims, go with them.
Thank you very much. Sorry, you spoke 3 seconds extra. I think this comment is for both of you. Quranic manuscripts from 7th century are better than New Testament. So I'll give 1 minute for both of you to respond to this.
Is this my channel or?
That's your channel.
Okay, Quran manuscripts from 7th century better. Well, I'm not an expert about the Quran, and I'll defer to Jay, but I do know that as much as the Quran gets attacked, we do have very early 7th century, at least fragments, or even more than fragments, which, by the way, mention the name Muhammad. And I don't think it can be, if you say Muhammad means praised one for Jesus. I think there's 4 references in the Quran. I don't know how well they actually apply to presenting as being Jesus. But yeah, we didn't really get into the Quran, and that's not one of my special fields of expertise. But I definitely do know that as much as the Quran gets attacked as also being some kind of fabrication, it is very old. I dealt with it at the Library of Congress. We actually had original manuscripts, and I told you I tried to work with the Kufic script, and it is very hard to read. I get all that as well, but it is what it is. It exists, and it's old.
Thank you very much, sir. Jay Smith, your 1 minute starts.
Yeah, I could go on for an hour on this one. I would dispute what Raymond just said there. It is not old. There's none from the 7th century that might mention Muhammad. The Birmingham Folio is the best you're going to get, and that's a 645, and it's from 3 stories that predate Islam, predate Muhammad, have nothing to do with Muhammad, and have nothing to do with Islam. The one that the manuscripts that you're looking at, the Samarkand, I've got it right here. The Samarkand, the top copy, I've got it right here behind me. These all start to appear in 705. That's 8th century. There is none from Uthman. Even the Muslim scholars, Dr. Atukulich and Ikmel al-Nisanlum both admit there are no Uthmanic manuscripts at all. So where is the 7th century manuscript that you're quoting that's so old in the Library of Congress that you can date to 650 new? Raymond, you know that you can't support that. And that's the problem. There is no 7th century manuscript. Now, what about New Testament? My goodness, there's so much that's not complete, but we have so much to go on the New Testament that starts to appear in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th century. That's why I'm saying, because one has made on papyrus, the other is made on parchment. Why is it they cannot preserve those
parchments? Your time
is
up, sir. Thank you very much. Question. Thank you very much for your generous. Sir, question is for Raymond Ibrahim.
Okay. Yeah. Chris at Speaker's Corner. Ibrahim, peace be with you, brother. Thank you. You too. Is it fair to compare evidence needed to demonstrate historicity in 1300 BC, etc., with the 7th century AD? Shouldn't we have different expectations? Okay, I think maybe what he's talking about is my point about the Old Testament, because that's a lot older. Okay. Yes and no, because on the one hand, yeah, it's very old, but okay, so let's start with the Muslim ones. I think, Muhammad in the 7th century, and depending on who you want to believe, but okay, the Muwatta or the Hadith, I mean, I know Jay gives them very, very, very late dates because he's going by the most extant manuscript, okay? But if you do the same thing, in other words, from the time of the most extant manuscript of each religion, or the Old Testament and Islam, to the time of the people it describes, it's still a lot longer for the Old Testament. Okay, we're talking about, okay, forget about Moses. What about Adam and Eve? I mean, what about the Genesis account? I mean, I know it's supposed to be written by Moses, of course, but we're talking at least 1,000 years. What we're talking about now with Islam, okay, is again, the problem is Jay's presenting dates that are not necessarily accurate, because he's going by what exists, not necessarily what it's based on. But even if we go with that, it's still a shorter gap. Okay, 1300s from 800, that's maybe 500 years as opposed to 1,000. So yes, I get it. He made the point that we don't expect anything from the Old Testament because it's so old. But that's a subjective argument, and it's a very different thing as well, because Arabia and the conditions in Arabia and the fact that Islam is not Christianity, it's not as important. It didn't have the impact on people that you would expect. I give it the kind of validity of like the Viking sagas, but so it is not that important. But we do have it. And it's still so you still have to account for the gap. The gaps, my point is the gaps exist no matter what, whether it's what you really believe or what you don't. They always exist.
Your time is up, sir. Thank you very much. Jay Smith.
Actually, Raymond just answered my point for me in the very last sentence that he made, and that's really what Chris is getting at here. Thank you, Chris. I know, Chris. Listen, when you're looking at 3,400 years ago versus just 1,400 years ago, no one in their right mind would expect any manuscript evidence from that far, especially when it was written on papyrus. That's why he's saying you can't make the same comparison, and you agreed with that. That's why we go to artifacts, and I've already answered this. I'm not going to go through that again. But this idea that when Christianity was introduced and when it was such a small bit of people that were affected by it. Whereas when Islam was introduced, it was introduced right across the world, known world at that time. And yet we can't find anything about this man or this place or this book. And yet it dominated the 7th century. All these people that were dominated by them, they don't refer to them. They don't even refer to the book, and they don't refer to the place. That's the problem, and that's what we're saying. It was so huge, it came across the world so big, and yet nobody seemed to know about it for at least 2, 3, and I would say for at least 400 years.
Sorry, thank you. I think this question is for Jay.
Oh, is this it here? Why would they believe themselves Ishmaelites? That's like being a Jezebel Christian. If a people could reconstruct the oral law, could they do it with Muhammad? Why are they second-class cultists? Okay,
Jay, just a second. I wasn't sure if the question is for you. Raymond Ibrahim, do people call you Dr. Ray? Like, I was just thinking maybe that.
Okay, this is for him. It's not for me.
Whatever. Yeah.
Go ahead, Raymond. You take this, and I'll respond to it.
Okay, Dr. Ray, why would they believe themselves Ishmaelites? They don't. That's what people called them. And also they wanted to trace descent. Muslims and Arabs and Saracens and whoever have always been trying to trace descent through Old Testament figures because they want legitimacy and validity. So being an Ishmaelite is actually a good thing from their perspective, but it's what people call them more than what they call themselves. Let me continue with the question. That's like being a Jezebel Christian. Not necessarily, because even in the Old Testament rendering, which must have changed, could possibly in their own versions, the sons Ishmael will be a great nation. That's not necessarily a bad thing. And it's better than, if you can't be the chosen people, being a great nation, the sons of Ishmael is not necessarily a bad thing. It's better than nothing. Now continues, if a people could reconstruct the oral law, could they do it with Muhammad? Why are they second-class cultists? Okay, I don't know. I'm not following this. If someone wants to explain it to me, Hatun. If a people could reconstruct the oral law, could they do it with Muhammad? Muhammad, you have to understand, there's nothing strange or conspiratorial about this. They didn't have vowels or diacritics in the 7th century. It would always have to look like that. That doesn't mean it wasn't Muhammad. Later on, they put the vowels so you know where it is, and people now pronounce it Muhammad. But it's still today in Arabic, unless you're writing a children's book, written Muhammad. It's written MHMD. People don't take the time to put the diacritics or the kasra and the fatha to indicate the vowels. So this is much ado about nothing, to be honest with you. When I see this as an Arabic speaker, and then why they read second-class cultists, I don't even know what that's asking me. So, thank you.
Okay, I'll pass it to Jay. Jay, you've got 1 minute if you want to respond.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, actually. I understand what this person is getting at. And that's why couldn't they use Muhammad? They did use Muhammad. Just look at the coins. Look at this coin here from 663. I know it's small, but can you see? It's Muawiyah's coin, and there's the front and there's the back. There's Muawiyah with a cross, and a cross. So it's obviously a Muawiyah is a Christian. On the back side of the coin, there's another cross, and right at the bottom where that green is, it's Mimha Mimdal. There's the Muhammad. What is Muhammad doing on a coin if it's Muhammad? You can't have Muhammad on the back coin of a person who's a Christian. So that's why you have to say in from 663 already you see a reference to a well-known Christian, because there's his inscription here that's on Taif, and there it is. He talks about himself and he writes in Greek, but he refers to himself as the Al-Muminin, the head of the believers. And what believers? Look up in the left-hand corner, there's a cross. So in this case, the Muhammad that's there in the 7th century is a Christian Muhammad, not a Muslim Muhammad.
Can I take 30 seconds to respond to that?
Go ahead.
Okay, so I actually took a class at Georgetown with Clive Foss, and what I remember about this issue is he was pointing out how the Arabs, because they didn't have their own coins, appropriated the Byzantine, Sassanian coins, and what they would do is try to break one of the pieces of the cross because they didn't like it, and they also would impose Muhammad's name over Christ's name as a sort of way of saying, it's another way of Allahu Akbar. My prophet is better than yours. And so that is how I always understood why Muhammad's name appears on coins that were originally Christian, because it was an appropriation and it was the best they could do to kind of, erase the Christian aspect. they're imposing Muhammad not as the praised one, Jesus, but as this is our prophet over yours. That's actually what I had a class about, and I only want to say it because it came to my mind right now.
Okay, thank you. That was.
Can I respond to that?
No, it's not a debate, Jay. It's not a debate.
It is a debate.
No, debate part
That's
is
the whole purpose. Because there's a great response to what he just said about Clive Ross and Volker Pop. He needs to go to Volker Pop. I have nothing against Clive Ross, but he is not an expert in this area, and his opinion has been now rebuked because of the fact that they're both on in the same form, and you need to look at the inscription to show that he was a fine Christian. But there's much more we could say about Mu'awiyah being a good Christian. But we'll do that for another time.
Thank you very much. And that was officially end of 1 hour.
Okay.
For the question and answers.
Listen,
I don't. If you want, if I can get a 2-minute break, it's up to you.
I am happy to give you 2 minutes break because we've got some super chats through your channel.
Listen, I'm going to have to go because I did tell people that I'd be finished by 6. I'm sorry about that. But can we can do another debate on another time, probably on another subject, because I like Raymond. I think this is great what he's doing, and I think it's
like
great what he's coming.
Okay,
well, that's good to know.
Okay, so I'll give 2 minutes to Raymond Ibrahim because he's got like he can take the break, and then he's got some super chats.
Okay, yeah, I'll take a 2-minute break, and I'll come back, and we can try to wrap it up. All right.
Okay.
Good talking with you, Jay. I'll be right back.
I'm going to still be here. Don't say goodbye yet.
Oh, I thought you were leaving. Okay.
Okay, I'll make sure we don't discuss the topic. Okay. Jay Smith, how old are you going to be now? How old are you?
I'm 72 years old. Don't I look it?
You look like more 89 or something.
Thank you.
I don't know why you think 72 still.
Look, you can take off that question at the bottom there.
I am. It just takes time. So how was your birthday?
Well, this is my birthday. This is my present. My wife is waiting for me because we're going to go out for dinner. And we have a friend upstairs that's waiting also. He wants to come to dinner. I told him to get on her laptop and watch this. She's never watched me do a debate in my life. And I've done almost 100 debates. So I said, but she's a counselor, so she needs to be out counseling, and she just got back. So that was why I was on the phone in the 5-minute break, to have her get on and show our friend what's happening. So we're going to go out and have a good time together and have some food, get something in my belly, because I've not eaten yet, except for earlier this morning.
I don't think it's going to damage you because you are away from food for a while.
Well, thank you. So in other words, I need to lose a lot more weight. This is what you're saying. Aren't you really condemnatory today?
I do remember I said that to you before, a while back.
You and everybody else in my family. For those who wonder what she's talking about, I'm overweight. She keeps thinking I'm overweight and that I'm going to die quickly, and she doesn't want me to die so quick.
Why not?
Because we
all want to spend eternity with our triune God. Why do you want to stuck in this world, Jay?
I'm not going to die because of my overweight. I'm going to die because I'm going to be hit by a car, or I'm going to be executed by the Muslims. I think that's what they would rather do with me. And after this debate, it could be.
You will be fine.
Listen. Look who I'm talking to. Of all people, they've attacked you more than anybody else I know.
I was just saying, doesn't matter how you go or when you go, you know who you are going to. That's the bottom line.
It's where you go. You're right, and I agree with that. And we know where we're going, don't we, Hatun?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm back.
You are back. We were just talking about you. Okay.
Oh.
Yeah, you're back on a live stream, so that no one knows what you are.
If you really want to know what she was talking about, she was comparing my body with your body, and she was trying to say that my body is going to kill me and you're going to live forever.
I don't know about that.
No one is going to live forever. Okay, so let's deal with a couple of super chats, and then we are officially done. Raymond Ibrahim.
Okay, Logan Misiak. I'm with Ray. Thank you. We have to acknowledge that we are limited to oral and written tradition when we are talking about people who lived thousands of years ago. Yeah.
Okay. And Isaiah, thank you very much for your generosity. And Raymond Ibrahim.
Adam Bernard, thank you for the czar. Hit that like button to draw that line, or you could get zutted. I think he's talking about al-zut.
Yep.
Which is, again, goes back to why would they create that for Muhammad? But okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Only a few more.
I feel left out. I'm getting no money from all this.
I can send all the money come to my channel to you, Jay. Don't make a problem on that. Okay. So question for both of you. Were the Spanish justified for Inquisition, or does it deserve condemnation? All things considered, I would say it is justified and overdue. Anyone?
Who goes first?
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, again, this is one of those things I'd say it's justified because we don't get the context. What we're told is just crazy, evil Catholics wanted to force everyone, Muslims, Jews, to become a Christian. The context is you actually had a fifth column, especially the Muslims, who were working with foreign Muslim agents, Ottomans, Barbary, pirates, to subvert Spain back to Islam. And, you know, we have a lot of testimonial of these Muslims who would convert and get baptized and teach, and their children would convert, and it would be generational. But 4 generations down the line, they would find out they were doing taqiyya in their heart. They were still Muslims. They were preaching hatred for Christians. They were trying to subvert and do everything they could. So that's the missing part of the context that we don't hear. We just hear like crazy, evil Spaniards forcing people to become Christians. But there was a lot more to it than that. And I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, sir. Jay?
I'm going to have to disagree finally with Raymond on this one. I follow right back to what Jesus said when he's there in the Garden of Gethsemane, and one of the disciples, Peter, took a sword and cut off the ear, and he turned towards Peter and he says, after put the ear back on, the servant says, Peter, put away your sword, for he who lives by the sword dies by the sword. That's my paradigm. I'm a pacifist. So though I love what Raymond does with the history, and I love the way that he supports it, I don't support him on this issue. I think, the church was a lot better when we weren't going to war, when we did not use any type of violence. I think if we follow what Jesus did when he went obediently to the cross, when he certainly went and he was even crucified, and look how he said on the cross, Father, forgive them for what they have done. That's the spirit that I want the world to live in. I don't think we need to have a Christian state. I don't think that we should ever impose a Christian state on it. I think the only kingdom of God I want to be is where Jesus is, and where there are 2 or 3 gathered in his name. That's the kingdom that I propose.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your generosity. I'm not asking questions. Both Raymond and Jay are awesome. I just wanted to say happy birthday to my professor. It looks like someone brought their student to my channel.
No, that's Dwi Bulan. She's a tigress in Indonesia.
Anna, thank you very much for your generosity. I am a good moderator. I'll take that as a compliment. Okay. This is through Raymond's channel. Thank you very much, Yusuf.
Thank you, Yusuf. If Jay is consistent, doesn't he then have to apply his same critique to the Torah, which is written 1,000 years before our earliest manuscripts? Well,
We've
that's
already
what I've
covered
been.
this.
Should I elaborate, or is this? What,
I think we've already covered this. You went in and I went on this one.
Yeah, we did talk about historical reliability of
Thanks,
the Torah.
Yusuf. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay, so that's kind of end of super chat, and then there are 80 more questions are waiting, and we are not going to look at them.
Okay. Why don't we just have 2 minutes of summation each? Go ahead and then I'll go.
Oh, you already did your closing statement, Jay. So
Call
you
the
are
summation
not
then.
satisfied. You are not satisfied. Have you answered the question? Is that the point you are trying to make?
No, how are we going to end off this debate? Don't we have a summation right at the end?
No, you had your closing statement. John, thank you very much for your generosity. It's not a debate, but invitation to no problems. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, since we kind of finished the conversation, finished the debate, we've got like 80 more questions are waiting there, and we are not going to respond to them. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a few minutes, not just summarize what you've done on your debate. You can reflect on that in your own time or have debate with your people. Just if you can give us a few minutes, what is happening in your ministry, how can people follow, where people can go to find more information on the topics they are looking for. If you can just summarize your ministry, and then show us how you can help brothers and sisters who are going to go out and reach the Muslims. So who wants to go first?
Okay.
Gentleman's first.
Yeah. Okay. So what I do, I mean, a lot of people I'm sure who are watching, if you're primarily you follow Jay, you probably don't know much about me, but I'm a writer primarily first and foremost. I have been for almost 20 years, but I've started a YouTube channel recently. It's almost been a year, and that's a lot of fun. So I'm learning a lot of this sort of thing, streaming and chatting and whatnot. And but primarily I write about history, Islamic history vis-a-vis the West. I write about the persecution of Christians under Islam, which is a very real thing. One of my books goes back about 13 years on that topic. And yeah, if you want to follow me, you can come to my website, raymondibrahim.com, and or you can check me out on on YouTube, which you just put my name, I guess. And yeah, there it is on my website. You'll see also links to my books that I've written. I have a new book coming out, The Two Swords of Christ, which is a look into the military orders and how they resisted Islam. I understand Jay's point about pacifism, and it's actually a very good point because that's a lot of my work. I would argue goes counter to pacifism, and in a sense, it's a little against the grain. Most Christians, I think, would agree with Jay. But I think what I try to show is the historical context. It's very easy for us now to sit and poo-poo people Christians who fought back. But when you really see what was happening, if they didn't fight back, Christianity could have died, believe it or not. And I know people will say, well, Christianity thrived through persecution during the Roman times. That may be the case, but I do believe there is room for just war theory. And I think that's one thing that needs to be at least analyzed and, if not, possibly reclaimed. So a lot of my work actually delves into that aspect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anything brothers and sisters who are watching you can pray for you in this coming weeks?
Just pray for me per se, from beginning to end.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Jay Smith.
Yeah,
Take 2 minutes.
I've been working in this world, this type of work as a missionary. I'm a son of missionaries and a grandson, so I'm third generation missionary. Was born and grew up in India, and so I was surrounded by Muslims all around me. There were about over 200 million Muslims mostly in northern India. So I had Muslim roommates, Muslim classmates, and I found them to be the most exciting people, and they're my favorite people. I've grown up with them, and I just love them to death. And I love their energy. I love their passion. I love the fact that they are willing to die for what they believe. And I wish Christians would be as passionate as they are. And they are the ones that really drive me to continue to bring them home. I want to bring them home because they've got the wrong God, the wrong book, the wrong man, and they've got the wrong salvation. So that's what I've been doing for almost 44 years now. Now, as far as what I'm doing now, I have also a YouTube channel like Raymond Ibrahim, and it's called Fander Films, P-F-A-N-D. There it is on the bottom right there. I have about 120,000 subscribers. Most of what I'm doing now is this historical critique because there's so few of us that are doing it. Very few of us want to really get into this. And I agree with Raymond. This is not something for everybody to do. It is only for a few of us who are interested in the origins. But much of the material comes from my work at 25 years of going down to Speaker's Corner every Sunday, getting up on a ladder and taking on hundreds of Muslims. Raymond, that's why I am the way I am. I have to speak like that because that's the only way you can really win a lot of the arguments at Speaker's Corner. Now, Hatun has been with me. She's been with me since 2013. We were together at Speaker's Corner for at least 4 or 5 years. And because of that, we in some of the material that I've worked out have moved it gets into Fander Films, and then I teach it in a master's degree program at Veritas International University. It's a master's degree program that goes for 2 years, and we have 10 courses. Each one is 8 weeks long. The next one is going to be on apologetics and polemics starting up on Monday. So if you want to find out about it, just go to MAPI. Just go up to the MAPI course, and you can come and join. But you have to be a Christian.
Okay, I'll put the link in the descriptions of people to check it out if they want, and also I will put the link to the description for Raymond Ibrahim's books. Check them out as well, and keep eye on the one which is coming. Raymond Ibrahim, do you want to say thank you to this last super chat?
Yeah, Johnny B. Thanks and God bless, he writes, and I reciprocated to you completely. Thank you and God bless.
And thank you very much, everyone in the chat who joined us in both channels. I'm sorry we were not able to go through all of your questions, but we really appreciate that you took time and spent with us for 3 hours, 21 minutes, 37 seconds. So thank you very much for that. And of course, thank you very much to Raymond Ibrahim and Jay Smith for willing to have this debate and discussion and helping me to once again be confident whether Muhammad exists or he is not exist. Jesus Christ is the King of Kings, Lord of Lords, and Muslim needs to know his glorious gospel and they need to repent and turn to our glorious God. So thank you very much for reminding me that once again. And we will see you probably on another live stream or any other different platform. Until I see you again, may Christ crucified silent you with his love, as well as please subscribe to Raymond Ibrahim's channel if you haven't, or if you are in that channel and have not subscribed to DCCI Ministries and Fonda Films, do so to get more resources. God bless you all, and we will see you again.